Welcome to Vampire Harry. Today's adventure: what if Alice Cullen saw Harry Potter arrive in Forks in a vision? Hit subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss a tale from the family. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The weight of survival. The graveyard at Godric's Hollow held its breath in the hour before dawn, and so did Harry. He had stopped trying to fight that small synchronicity. Whatever he was now, the world bent around him in tiny ways, kettles that wanted to whistle for him, doors that opened a hair before he reached them, his own breath that fell into rhythm with whatever room he stood in. He had walked through the wrought iron gate at 4 in the morning without ringing the bell, and the village beyond the wall lay still under a thin mist, and his lungs had matched themselves to the land's slow exhale before he understood he was doing it. He did not light a wand. He did not need to. His eyes had adjusted years ago and had never stopped. The marble of the Potter's stone caught what little light the moon offered. The carved letters were sharp under his fingers. Lily Potter, James Potter. The dates that had written themselves into him before he had been old enough to read them. He stood there as he had stood there 100 times in 2 years, and nothing came. No words, no tidy grief. Only the long pull at the back of his ribs that was the closest thing to weather inside him these days. He set down the bouquet of lilies. Hermione had remembered to send them as she always did, and crouched so his palm was flat against the cold turf. "I'm leaving," he said, and the word came out quieter than he had meant it to. The grass made no answer. He had not expected it to. He stayed a while in that crouch anyway. He visited the Lupins next. Remus and Tonks shared a stone in the new section, and beside them was a smaller marker that meant nothing to anyone who hadn't been there. A stone carved by Andromeda to mark the place where, in some symbolic way, the wider Black Lupin family stood watch. Sirius was on it. Sirius was not buried anywhere. Sirius had gone where there were no graves to dig, and Harry had been complicit in that for a good long while now, and was no longer interested in pretending he was over it. He sat on his heels and rested his forearms on his knees and looked at the stones until his vision blurred and corrected itself. "You'd have laughed," he told the cold air. "Serious. You'd have laughed at me. I'm running. I know it's running. I know what you'd have said about that, and you'd have been wrong, and you'd have known it, and you'd have said it anyway just to make me laugh back." He did not laugh. Neither, of course, did Sirius. Harry had grown comfortable in this kind of conversation, the kind where you said it because it had to be said and not because anybody could hear. The mist was beginning to silver. He stood and he was steady, and he disapparated the way he disapparated now, which was without sound. Number 12, Grimmauld Place was not warm. It had not been warm in 150 years. And Harry had not made it warm in the 2 years he had owned it, and he had stopped trying. Creature had stopped trying with him, in a grudging companionable way that was the closest he and the elf had ever come to peace. Creature kept the kitchen and the library and the master bedroom in serviceable condition, and the rest of the house was a museum of a family Harry had inherited but never met, and on most days that was fine. Harry made his own tea this morning. Creature watched him from the doorway with the small frown he wore whenever Harry did anything for himself. And then, when Harry pretended not to notice, the elf padded away to do whatever it was he did at 5 in the morning in the cellar. Harry took his mug to the long table and sat down and watched the steam rise. He did not drink tea for the taste. He drank it because his hands wanted to be wrapped around something hot, and because he had learned over the last year that when he did not eat or drink for several days at a time, his body did not particularly notice, and that was the kind of fact he preferred to bury under small, ordinary rituals. He was on his second mug when the flue flared. Hermione stepped out of the green flame, already dusting soot off her sleeves with a small, wandless flick. Her hair was tied up. She was wearing the navy robe she wore when she meant to be taken seriously by old men, which meant she had come straight from a hearing or was on her way to one. She had the file under her arm. He had been expecting her. He had not been expecting her to look this tired. "Harry," she said, and stood there a moment the way she always did now, as if she needed to confirm he was still in the room before she came any closer. "Hermione," he said. "Tea. Please." She sat. He poured. They watched each other across the table the way two old fencers might before they started, and then Hermione laid the file flat between them and slid it across. "Healer Greengrass finished the analysis last night," she said. "She owled me at 3. I came as soon as I dressed." He did not open the file. He looked at it. "Just tell me," he said. She let out a small breath, and then in her clear, careful voice she told him. The bone density unchanged across 2 years of measurements. The marrow saturation unchanged. The cellular turnover that should have ticked through the normal small entropies of a healthy young man, gone. Replaced by something the healer had spent 4 pages declining to name and then had named in the last paragraph, in the careful phrase a researcher uses when she does not want to be quoted. A self-sustaining regenerative cascade of indefinite duration of unknown ceiling. "In English," he said when she stopped. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she looked at him directly. "You aren't going to age, Harry. Not the way the rest of us will. She estimates, she's not certain, and she hates being uncertain. You know how she is. She estimates a deceleration of approximately 98% against the standard wizard baseline. She thinks the ceiling, if there is one, may be measured in centuries." He did not say anything. He drank his tea. The tea was beginning to go cold. "Disease appears to be ineffective," Hermione went on, because she had decided to give him all of it at once, and she was that kind of brave. "Any pathogen introduced to the sample tissue is destroyed within 14 seconds. She's tested dragonpox. She's tested basilisk venom. The venom is the most interesting one, actually, because of course you've already had it once, and the second exposure produced a faster response than the first. The healer thinks your body is, and I quote, adapting, learning." He set the mug down. He folded his hands on the wood. "How long has she known?" he said. "She's been 90% sure for 6 months. She wanted certainty before she gave it to you. And you?" Her eyes didn't move from his. 3 months. Right. I didn't tell you because I wanted her to be wrong," Hermione said quietly. "And then I didn't tell you because I wanted to find a way to fix it before I had to look you in the face and tell you it couldn't be fixed. It can't be fixed." She did not answer. She did not have to. The Hallows had done what the Hallows had done, and the line in the tale that nobody read carefully enough. He greeted death as an old friend and went with him gladly. Had not, it turned out, been about a single human moment. Whatever it was the stone had recognized in him, whatever it was the cloak had remembered, whatever it was the wand had refused to leave alone, they had agreed about him, the 3 of them, in a way the world had not been built to accommodate. He was very tired. "All right," he said. She watched him. "All right what?" "All right." He stood up and went to the window and looked out over the small, unkempt garden where Mundungus had once tried to bury something he didn't want anyone to find. "That's information. I have it now. Thank you for bringing it to me. Harry, Hermione." He turned around. He smiled at her, the small, worn smile he kept for her and for Ron and for nobody else. "I've known. I think I've known for a long time. I've been bandaging cuts that closed before I could bandage them. I caught a chill at Christmas and it lasted 40 minutes. I haven't been sick in 2 years. I've been waiting for someone to tell me, that's all. It's easier to know." "It's not easier. It's easier than wondering." She put her face in her hands and held it there a moment, and then she lowered them and her eyes were red but dry. "What are you going to do?" she said. "That," he said, "is what I asked you here to talk about." He had not asked her to talk about it. He had been planning to write her a letter. But she had come and told him a thing he could not unhear, and so he sat back down and he laid out his plan, and she did not interrupt him, and she did not cry again, and at the end she said only one thing. "You'll write me. Every week. Every week. Every week I have something worth saying. Every week regardless, she said. If you have nothing to say, write me about the weather. Write me a list of what you ate. Write me complete nonsense if you have to, just write. All right, promise. Hermione, promise me, Harry. I promise, she nodded once sharp. She put a hand flat on the file between them. And take this. She wrote a copy for you. There are protocols in the back, things to watch for. I don't think they'll matter, but take it. All right. And you'll tell Ron. You'll tell Ron. Coward. Spectacular coward, he agreed mildly. I'll write him. I'll write him before I go. She stood up. She looked older than she was, and she always had. She came around the table and she put her arms around him, and he held her, and her grip was harder than it had been at any wedding or funeral they had survived together, which was saying something. You come back, she said into his shoulder. Whenever you want, there's always a room, always, do you hear me? I hear you. Whenever. I hear you, Hermione, I do. She held him a long time. Then she stepped back, and she looked at his face, and she shook her head once with a small, sad, amused expression that he remembered from 100 libraries and tents and battlefields, and she stepped back into the flue and went away. He stood in the empty kitchen for a while afterward. Then he went upstairs and started packing. He took less than he thought he would. He took the rucksack Hermione had charmed for him in 7th year, which still held more than it ought and weighed less than it should. He took clothes, Muggle clothes, mostly, jeans and shirts and one good coat. He took the photo album Hagrid had given him at the end of 1st year, and he took the album Andromeda had assembled for him out of Sirius's odds and ends. And he took the small leather-bound book Remus had left him with marginalia in 3 languages. He took a kitchen knife in case he needed one and a kettle because he could not bear to leave behind the kettle, and he laughed at himself for that small absurdity, and then he packed the kettle anyway. He took the cloak, folded down to the size of a handkerchief. He took the stone, on a chain, which he wore now around his neck and did not turn 3 times. He took the wand, which had stopped being the elder wand to him about 6 months after he had laid it back where it belonged at the end of the war, but which had picked up a few of the wand's old habits anyway, the way a horse will sometimes adopt the manner of its previous rider. He took Atlas. Luna had given him Atlas on the anniversary of Hedwig's death without ceremony or note, just the cage on the doorstep at Grimmauld with a length of ribbon tied around the door and a single feather underneath. Atlas was a snowy owl with 1 black flight feather in each wing. For balance, Luna had said, in the way she said things, and he had understood her perfectly. The bird had taken to him fast. Atlas had not so much joined him as moved in. The bird sat now on Harry's wrist with the half-asleep dignity of a creature who knew he was about to be put through a long, unpleasant flight, and was willing, on principle, to be charming about it. I'm sorry, Harry told him. I'd take you the easy way, but I want this leg quiet. You can find me, you always do. Atlas blinked once. He clicked his beak. He took off through the open window and was gone in a soft white blur. He spent the afternoon writing letters. He wrote to Ron. He wrote to Ginny. He wrote to Andromeda and to Teddy, both in the same envelope, because Teddy was 3 and Andromeda would read it to him. He wrote to Luna briefly, because Luna would not need a long letter. He wrote to McGonagall. He wrote to Kingsley. He wrote to Hermione last, and the letter to Hermione was the shortest, because everything that needed saying he had said in the kitchen. He set the letters on the long table. He left instructions for Creature to send them after the flue connection had gone dark behind him. He told Creature last that Creature could stay or come or go, and Creature, with great offended dignity, said that Master would of course be sending for Creature when Master had a proper kitchen again, and that Creature would of course remain at Grimmauld in the meantime to maintain the standards of the house in Master's absence. Harry did not argue. He thanked the elf. The elf bowed with a stiffness that was, in elf, a deeply felt thing. He left through the front door at midnight. He locked it behind him. He turned and looked at the house once, at the small scratched plaque under the brass knocker, and he thought of Sirius and of Buckbeak in the upstairs bedroom, and of the long cold winter when they had all eaten Mrs. Weasley's stew at the table he had just left, and he turned and walked away. Heathrow at 1 in the morning was a different city. He moved through it without a glance at anyone and without anyone glancing at him. He had not cast a notice-me-not. He did not need to. He had learned slowly that he could let the wizarding world fall away from him simply by deciding to stop lighting up in it, and the Muggle world received him as it received any quiet young man with a backpack and a passport. He had a passport. Hermione had insisted on it years ago. She had pressed it into his hand the day he had told her about the trip he was not yet planning, the passport she had had ready in a drawer for him, and she had said, "Just take it now. You can decide later." He had taken it. He was glad. He bought a ticket at the desk, Seattle, Washington, one way, and the woman behind the counter smiled at him, the routine professional smile of the late shift, and he smiled back, and she handed him his boarding pass without a flicker of recognition. He had 8 hours to wait. He sat on a bench by gate 41 with the pack at his feet, and pulled out the small atlas he had taken from Sirius's library, the one with the leather binding and the gold-tooled compass on the cover. He opened it across his knees and turned to North America, and he laid his finger flat on the long stretch of the Pacific Northwest, on the green sliver of coast where the Olympic Peninsula jutted out into a gray ocean. He moved his finger up the coast slowly until he found a name he liked. Forks. Population 3,000, the atlas said in tiny neat print. Annual rainfall, abominable. Settlement, late 19th century, on land formerly belonging to the Quileute. Industry, lumber, formerly. He read all of it and he closed the atlas and he sat there a while with his hand resting on the cover. Forks, he said quietly to himself, and his mouth liked the word. There was a fork in his road. There were a great many forks in his road, and he had been ducking all of them. He had picked up a name on a map that was a literal fork. There was something in him that found the small accidental joke comforting, the way only somebody very tired can find a stupid thing comforting. He put the atlas back in his pack. He let himself, for a moment, think about everything he was leaving. He let himself think about Ron's sleepy face at breakfast and Hermione's hand on his shoulder and Ginny laughing across a kitchen table, and Teddy's small fierce fingers in his hair, and the burrow at sundown, and McGonagall's spare formal smile, and Hagrid's vast hopeful wave from the half-built hut. He let himself feel all of it for the count of 10 heartbeats, and the ache rose up under his ribs with the particular sharpness it had now. The sharpness he had begun to suspect was permanent. Then he let it go. He was very good at letting it go. He had been practicing. He boarded the plane just before 9. He took a window seat. He watched London fall away below him in a slow gray smear. He put his head against the window and closed his eyes and slept, properly slept, for the first time in 3 weeks. Somewhere over the Atlantic, in a continent he had never seen, Atlas was already flying west. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The vision, the Cullen house, in late afternoon, ran on a quiet that wasn't really quiet. A human stepping through the front door would have heard nothing. A vampire heard the small, constant percussion of the family at rest. Esme's pen on the architectural sketch she was finishing. The chess pieces clicking on the board where Emmett had been losing to Edward for 100 years, and intended to lose to him for 100 more. The whisper of the page Carlyle was turning in his study upstairs. The patient rhythmic tap of Rosalie's heel against the floorboard while she read Italian Vogue with the bored expression she had come into the world wearing. Outside, rain. Inside, the small economic noises of a family that had decided long ago that quiet domesticity was the most expensive thing they owned, and had bought it accordingly. Alice was on the rug in front of the bay window with a sketchbook open and one pencil between her teeth and another in her hand. The sketchbook was an old one she had not used for 2 years, which was Alice for restless. She had drawn nothing yet. She had, in the last 40 minutes, drawn only the same single curve 4 times, and each time she had not liked it, and each time she had lifted the pencil and turned the page. Esme, 2 rooms away, registered this through the architecture of the house, through the small hesitation in Alice's breath, the irregular tap of the pencil's eraser on the page, and let it be. Alice came to her when she wanted to come. It was Jasper who looked up first, from the leather chair by the fire. He had come up from Texas for the season with Charlotte, his mate, the woman Alice had seen for him in a vision 4 winters ago. A long, pale woman with a slow smile and red eyes at first, then gold by the second year, who had walked into a library in Houston on a Tuesday in October exactly as Alice had described it. Alice and Jasper had not been a couple in the way the human world used the word for a year before Charlotte had arrived. They had simply been the kind of close that survives most things, including the discovery that you are not, in fact, each other's home. Charlotte had brought him home. Charlotte had also quietly become a Cullen by adjacency, and the family had folded around her without anyone making a speech about it. Charlotte was upstairs reading in the library with Carlyle. Jasper was downstairs reading nothing. He was watching Alice. He felt it before she felt it. He felt the small tightening of the room around her, the way a thunderhead organizes itself before it lets a single drop fall. Alice had gone very still. Her pencil was no longer touching the page. Her eyes, which were always a little too quick, had stopped on a fixed point in the air about 3 feet in front of her, and her chest had stopped its small, unnecessary breathing motion. She had the distinct quality just before a vision broke of a glass into which something was about to be poured. "Alice," Jasper said mildly. She did not answer. Edward had already turned from the chess board. Emmett, registering Edward, had turned too. They were all looking at her now, the whole house leaning toward her as one organism because that was how it worked in a family of this kind. Alice gasped, a small, completely unnecessary intake of air, and the vision took her. She saw a bus. Not their bus, the local school bus. A long-distance bus, the dirty side panel of a Greyhound peeling paint in the corner where road salt had eaten through. The doors were folded open. A young man was stepping down from the last step onto the cracked pavement of the lot beside the diner. The diner sign, above and behind him, reading FORKS coffee shop in faded red plastic letters. He was thin. He was tall enough but underweight in the long-sleeved shirt of a man who is colder than he ought to be. His hair was dark, near black, falling messy into his eyes. He carried a single canvas pack on one shoulder. There was an owl, she saw this, and understood without understanding it, a snowy owl banking out of low cloud above the diner's roof, white as a bone with one black flight feather in each wing. She saw his face. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the road, the wet ribbon of it leading north into the trees, the way a person looks at a place they have decided to belong to as a dare. She saw, under the collar of the shirt against the hollow of his throat, a small dark stone strung on a chain. The stone, when she looked at it, made a sound. It was not a sound she heard. It was a sound she felt, in the way she felt her own future arriving. She saw his eyes when he turned them. They were green, the green of underleaf, the green of the bottom of a cold pond, and they were old. Not in the way of vampires, who had their pasts behind them and a kind of museum dust in their irises. In the way of someone who had been emptied out and had not yet decided to be filled again. The vision flickered. Now there was a hood. A figure in a long black hood, 20 feet behind him in a doorway across the street, watching him with a stillness she recognized as the stillness of a hunter who has already decided. The hooded figure had a long, pale hand on a wand, and the wand was not visible, was concealed in the sleeve. But Alice saw it the way she saw everything in visions, by knowing. The vision flickered again. Now she was standing across the street herself, across from the boy, and he was looking at her, finally, the way he had been looking at the road. The leaves of a maple. There was a maple on the corner of Forks Avenue and Russell Street. She knew the tree, she had walked past it 1,000 times. The leaves of the maple were lifted up off the wet pavement, suspended in the air around them both, 2 and 3 and 10 of them at a time, hanging like the world had paused to consider the moment. The boy was not raising a hand. He was not gesturing. The leaves were doing what they were doing because of him and because of her, and because the air between them had already decided something neither of them had said aloud. She saw, for the briefest moment, a half flicker, the corner of a frame, herself laughing. Then the vision ended. Alice came back to the room very slowly. She blinked. Her hand, which had been suspended over the page, drifted down. The pencil tapped once against the paper. She did not lift her eyes from the place where the vision had been until she had put the pencil down very deliberately on the rug and folded her hands in her lap. Edward was on the floor in front of her. He had not heard because he could not what she had seen. He could see only the shape of her seeing it, the topography of her thought during the vision, and even that was a partial map, like watching a film through a curtain. He had, however, seen her face. He was kneeling and his eyes were narrow, and he was waiting. "Alice," he said. She lifted her eyes to him. "There's a boy," she said. Her voice was a careful, small voice. "There's a boy coming to Forks. He arrives," she frowned, listening for the date the way she did. "He arrives in a week, possibly 6 days, by bus." "All right," Edward said. "Why is that?" "He isn't human," Alice said. Behind him, Emmett, who was leaning over the back of the couch by then, said, "Werewolf." "No," she said, with the small certainty she used when she had ruled something out without thinking about it. "Not a vampire either. He has a heartbeat. I felt it, slow, steady." "What then?" Edward said. She shook her head slowly. "I don't have a word for it. There's a stone on a chain around his neck. It rings. There's an owl. There's a man following him. She stopped. "Edward, I couldn't read his future the way I usually do. It was clear. Right at him, the moment is clear, but the second I tried to follow it forward more than a few minutes, it went wide. Like the future bends differently around him. Like he hasn't decided yet, only in a much, much bigger way than people normally don't decide things." Edward was very still. "What do you mean, bigger?" "I mean," she said, "the futures don't just fork, they bloom. There were too many all at once. I had to close my eyes." Emmett mildly, "Sounds like our kind of trouble." "Emmett," Edward said. "What?" "Not now." Esme had come into the room without making a noise. She knelt next to Alice and put a hand on her shoulder. Alice tilted her face into the touch briefly, the way she had been doing since she was small enough to do it without being conscious of it. "Can you draw him for us?" Esme said. "Yes," Alice said. She picked up the pencil. She turned to a fresh page. She drew him for them in 7 minutes flat, the line of his shoulder, the angle of the canvas pack, the hair across his eyes. And then, because this was Alice, she drew his face fully, the lean cheek and the line of the jaw and the green pond gravity of the eyes. She did not draw the hooded figure across the street. She did not yet know how to draw it. She drew, around the edge of the paper in a thin frame of hatched lines, a series of small, faint circles she did not understand the purpose of, only that they belonged in the frame. Carlyle had come down by then. Carlyle did not come down quickly. Carlyle came down with the considered tread of a man who had heard, through the floor, that something was happening, and had decided which question he would ask first before he was in the room. Charlotte was behind him on the stairs. Jasper, who had not moved from the chair, had already cleared a space on the side table for the sketch. Carlyle looked at the sketch. He looked at it for longer than Alice had drawn it. His face did not change, but his shoulders set in a particular way Alice had learned to read over the decades. "Carlyle," Esme said. He did not answer at once. He set the sketch down. He sat in the chair across from Alice and folded his hands. Alice, the owl, the stone, the man following him, tell me everything you can, she told him. He listened with the exact attention he had given his medical residents at Johns Hopkins and his patients at Forks General and his children for as long as he had had them. She gave him every detail. The owl with the 2 black feathers, the stone that rang, the hooded figure across the street, the leaves in the air between her and the boy, the way the futures had bloomed instead of forking, the way Edward, in the vision glimpse she'd had of him, had stood beside her with his head cocked to one side as if he were straining to hear something he could not hear. "That last part," Edward said when she said it. "That last part. Can you go back into it, the part where I'm there?" "It's already faded," Alice said apologetically. "I can try again later." "I cannot read his mind," Edward said slowly. "You are saying I cannot read his mind." "I'm saying," she frowned. "Edward, when I look at you in the vision, you have the face you have when there's nothing there, not when someone is shielding from you, when there isn't a there. It's the same face you make when you're listening for a person, and they aren't where you thought they were." Edward did not say anything to that for a while. Edward, like his father, had a way of taking in a piece of information that mattered and turning it slowly until he could see it from the angle that most disturbed him. "Carlyle," Rosalie said from the doorway where she had appeared without anyone hearing her come down. She had her arms folded. Her voice was perfectly even. "We can leave. We can be in Anchorage by morning." "Rose," Esme said gently. "No," Rosalie said. "I am saying it because someone has to say it. Whatever this is, it's something we don't understand. There's a hooded man following him with what, Alice, with what looked to you like intent, with killing intent in the silhouette. A hooded man following a not-human boy with intent across an ocean to a town with us in it. There are 7 of us in this house. We have built a life here. And someone is bringing trouble into it on a greyhound. We can leave. We have always been able to leave. We have done it before." Rosalie, Carlyle said. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. "I hear you," she waited. "I am not yet decided," he said. Rosalie, I hear you, and I will weigh it. And we will discuss it as a family the way we always do, but I am not yet decided and I am not yet inclined." Rosalie's jaw worked. She looked at Esme. Esme, quietly, was looking at Alice. Esme had looked at the sketch once and at Alice for a long time after, and there was, in Esme's face, the careful, patient curiosity of a woman who had spent a century mothering children whose grief she did not always have permission to ask about. "Alice," Esme said, "what did you feel?" That was the question. That was always Esme's question. They all turned, even Rosalie, to hear how Alice answered it, because Alice's feeling about a vision was a thing they all weighted differently than the vision's facts. Alice did not answer at once. She picked up the sketch. She looked at the boy's face, which she had drawn from a memory only she had, and she let her eyes lose focus on it. Jasper, without thinking about it, leaned forward in the chair because Jasper read her. He did not need to be asked. "I felt," she said. She paused. "Jasper." "Yeah. What did you feel from me while I was in it?" Jasper did not answer right away either. He had had time to think. He thought longer. "I felt fear," he said carefully, "but not the kind of fear you have in a vision of something coming for us. Not strategic fear, not danger fear." "Then what?" He looked at her. He chose his words, the way he chose them when she was the one asking. "I felt," he said, "the kind of fear you feel when you recognize something you did not expect to recognize. The kind of fear that's a half step from joy. I felt it last when you saw Charlotte 4 years ago, the night I was leaving for Texas. I felt it then, and you looked at me and you said you were afraid I would never see her, and I said that was only because she was about to change my life. You had that fear tonight." Alice did not look at him. She looked again at the boy on the page. She did not say anything. "Alice," Edward said very gently. "I don't know who he is yet," she said. "I'm telling you that now, so that nobody has to ask it later. I do not know who he is. I don't know what he is. I don't know what he's running from or what he's running to. I know he's coming, and I know I will be on that corner on that morning, and I know I will say something to him. That's all I know. That's the whole of it." Carlyle, after a long moment, nodded. "Thank you, Alice," he said. He said it the way he said everything. He did not make a show of it. He made the words plain. He stood. He walked once slowly the length of the room and turned and stood at the far window with his hands clasped at the small of his back and looked out at the rain. The rest of the family arranged itself, in the way it did, around his thinking. Esme on the rug with Alice. Edward standing where Edward stood. Emmett sprawled across the back of the couch with his elbow on Rosalie's shoulder, ignoring the fact that Rosalie was rigid under it. Jasper in the chair. Charlotte, who had not yet spoken, in the doorway listening. The fire moved. "We will not run," Carlyle said at last. "Rosalie, I hear you. We will not run, and I will tell you why. We have lived here for 9 years. We are at peace with the Quilutes for the first time in 2 generations. Esme's vegetables are coming up well in the south greenhouse. Edward has begun composing again. Emmett is happier than I have seen him in 50 years. We will not abandon a place that has become a home because something we do not understand is moving toward it. We will instead observe. We will instead be ready. And we will, before we draw any conclusion at all, watch this boy with the carefulness he is owed by virtue of being, as far as we know, alone." Rosalie did not unfold her arms, but she dropped her chin once in something like assent. "We watch," she said. "And the moment he is a problem, Carlyle said, "we will treat it as a problem." "All right, all right." Carlyle turned from the window. He looked at his daughter on the rug. "Alice," he said, "you said you will be on that corner on that morning and you will say something to him." "Yes." "What will you say?" She tilted her head. She blinked once slowly. She said, "I don't know yet. I haven't decided." "All right, but I will be there." "Yes," Carlyle said with the smallest, gentlest smile he ever used. "I gathered." Later that night, after the house had gone back to its small, ordinary rhythms, Jasper found Alice on the porch. She was sitting on the top step with the sketch on her knees. She was not drawing. She was looking out into the dark of the trees the way she sometimes did when she was watching a future she had not yet pulled clearly into the present. He sat down beside her. He did not touch her. He had not touched her in that way for years. He sat the way a brother sits, close enough to be felt, far enough to be respected. "You all right?" he said. "I'm all right." He waited. "Jasper." "Yeah, what you said in there about what you felt." "Yes, you were telling the truth, always. It scared me." "I know." She turned the sketch over in her lap. The blank back of the page was very white in the porch light. "I don't know what to do with it," she said. "You don't have to know yet. I know. You can just be on the corner, I know, and see what happens." "Yes." He let the silence sit between them a while. The rain had stopped. The forest dripped and dripped and dripped, the way it always dripped here, which was the sound he had come to think of as the family's idle music. "Alice." "Yes. Whatever he is, whatever he turns out to be, we'll be there with you." "I know," she said. She leaned briefly, sideways into his shoulder and rested her temple there, and he did not move, and after a moment she straightened and stood and took the sketchbook back into the house. The owl much later passed over the roofline in the dark, and nobody in the house heard it but Jasper, who looked up and then back at the trees and did not say a word. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. Forks. The bus arrived at Forks on a Wednesday afternoon under a sky the color of wet slate, and Harry stepped off it onto cracked pavement and into a smell of damp pine and cold diner grease that struck him, not unpleasantly, as the smell of nowhere in particular. He stood for a moment with the canvas pack on his shoulder and let the bus pull away, and a few of the other passengers, a woman with a paper bag of groceries, an old man with a cane and a cap pulled low over his eyes, drifted past him toward the diner without giving him a glance. and the small spitting rain settled on his hair, and he closed his eyes for the count of 3. And when he opened them, he was, for the first time in 2 years, somewhere nobody was looking for him. It was an extraordinary feeling. He stood with it for a while. Then he hitched the pack and went to find a coffee. The diner, Forks coffee shop, the red plastic letters of its sign spelled, was the kind of place he had spent quiet years with Hermione during the hunt, finding analogues of, in 3 different counties, in 2 different decades of his memory. Vinyl booth seats, laminated menus with too many photographs, a long counter, 3 stools, a register, and a woman behind it of about 50, with gray at her temples and a small, clean apron, and the watchful, unhurried gaze of a woman who had run a diner for 25 years and knew the difference between a stranger who would tip and a stranger who would not. She decided, watching him come through the door, that he probably would. "Sit anywhere, hun," she said, and turned a coffee cup right side up on the counter without asking him. "Coffee, please. And actually, may I order something to eat?" "You may," she said dryly. "It's a diner." He smiled, a small involuntary smile at the dryness, and she liked him for it, and her watchfulness softened into the practical attention she gave to anyone she had decided to like. He took the stool nearest the window. He ordered a grilled cheese and a bowl of tomato soup, because Hermione had once told him that you could judge any town in any country by its grilled cheese, and he had believed her, and he had been right enough times since to keep the rule. "New here," the woman said when she set the soup in front of him. "Just arrived. Visiting. Looking for a place to rent, long-term." She raised an eyebrow. "Good luck with that," she said. "There's not a lot. You looking in town or out?" "Out, ideally. Quiet. I work, I write," he amended, because writing was the catch-all lie he had landed on during the last leg of the flight. It bought you privacy and explained a laptop or a notebook on a table without much follow-up. The woman considered him with the practical efficiency she gave to her bills. "Hold on," she said. "Hold on a second." She went to the wall phone behind the register. She dialed without consulting any list she could see. There was probably a list taped under the counter, written in pencil, 15 years old and updated quarterly, and she had a brief, polite conversation with a Mrs. Newton, evidently, about whether the cabin at the end of the Calloway Road was rented yet, and whether Mrs. Newton would be inclined to rent it to a quiet young man who wrote, which was a category Mrs. Newton, like everyone in town, had opinions about. 5 o'clock, the woman said when she came back. "End of Calloway Road. There's a sign, she'll show you the cabin. Cash or check, she doesn't take card. She's fair, she doesn't bargain, but she's fair. Don't try to bargain, she'll throw you out." "Thank you," he said. "I'm Matty, I run this place." "Harry," he said. "Pleased to meet you." "Harry, finish your soup before it skins over." He finished his soup. He left a tip that was a little more than was customary and a little less than would draw notice. He picked up his pack and went out into the rain. He had 3 hours to kill before 5. He walked. He walked the length of the main street and then back and then once more slowly, with his hands in his pockets and his head down against the slow, cold drizzle. He was used to walking. He had walked across most of Britain on the run, and he had kept walking after in the mornings before the world woke up, because his body had not learned how to be still even with a war to be still in. He walked Forks now with the same patient inventory he gave to every new place. The small post office, the hardware store with the green awning, the bookshop, which was closed with a paperback Sue Grafton in the window, the library with a hand-lettered sign apologizing for reduced winter hours, the grocery, where a teenage boy was pushing a long row of carts back into the entryway with the sullen efficiency of 17. A police cruiser passed him going north. The driver was a man in his 40s with a thick mustache and a heavy, patient face, and his eyes flicked across Harry once with the practiced glance of a small-town officer cataloging a stranger and going about his business. The cruiser turned the corner at Russell Street. By the maple Harry hadn't yet seen mattered and was gone. He stopped at a small bench in front of the closed bookshop. He sat down. He took out a notebook and pretended to write in it for a while, because pretending to write in a notebook was the most invisible thing a person could do in a town like this. He looked up, occasionally, at the maple on the corner of Russell. The leaves were very red. They rattled in the wet wind. He did not yet know about the maple. He liked it anyway. After a while he stood and shouldered the pack and went to find Calloway Road. The cabin sat at the end of a gravel track that branched off Calloway Road and ran a quarter-mile through second-growth cedar before it ended in a small clearing. The cabin was older than the road. It had been built, evidently, by hand in the 1930s by a man who knew how to fit a roof to the rain, and it had been added to twice, modestly, with respect to the original. There was a small front porch with 2 steps. There was a chimney and a stovepipe. There was a single back door that opened onto the woods. There was no immediate neighbor for half a mile in any direction. Mrs. Newton was on the porch when he came up. She was a small, wiry woman in her 70s, in a wax cotton coat and Wellingtons, with the sort of leathery face that registered nothing it did not intend to register. She watched him come up the track. She watched him climb the 2 steps. She watched him put down the pack at the edge of the porch and offer his hand. "Harry Black," he said. She took the hand. Her grip was firm and brief. He had picked the surname an hour earlier, walking back from the grocery, Black for serious, because Potter would have been picked up by anyone listening for it on either side of the Atlantic, and Black would not. Hermione would understand it when he wrote her. "Susan Newton," she said. "You're younger than I was led to expect." "I am," he said. "What do you write?" "Mostly nonfiction," he said mildly. "Recent history, travel. I'm trying a long project this year." I needed to be somewhere where I could keep my own hours and not be interrupted. She said. She unlocked the front door. She showed him through the cabin without preamble. 1 main room with the stove and the kitchen and a long pine table. 1 bedroom. A small bathroom with a shower built in by an enthusiast who had not been a plumber. A wood stove that worked. A propane heater for backup. A washer behind a folding door. A view out the back door of a small slope of moss and ferns that ran down to a creek 100 yards into the trees. $300 a week, she said. $400 deposit. 6 months minimum. You break anything not on the list, you replace it. You lose the keys, you replace the locks. You leave it cleaner than you found it. You want a phone, the line's there, you call the phone company. I do not visit, I do not call. Something needs fixing, you call me. Otherwise I do not exist, and you do not exist, and that is how I prefer it. "Mrs. Newton," he said, "that is exactly how I prefer it as well." She looked at him for a moment with the neutral, assessing look she gave everything in her life, and the look concluded evidently in his favor because she dropped the keys into his hand and said, "First and last and deposit. Cash if you have it, check if you don't. I'll wait while you write it." He had the cash. He had brought a great deal of cash, converted in 3 different currencies through 3 different channels in London. He counted out what she asked. She counted it back in her palm briskly, and put it in an inner pocket of the coat and shook his hand again, and went down the steps and up the track to the truck he had not heard her arrive in, and she was gone. He stood on the porch and listened to the truck's engine fade. Then he went into the cabin, and he closed the door behind him, and he set the pack on the table, and he did, slowly and with great care, the small set of things he had been waiting 4 flights and a bus ride to do. He drew his wand, he cast wards, he cast them by feel, he cast them the way Bill Weasley had taught him in the long, quiet weeks after the battle, when Bill had taken pity on Harry's clumsy schoolbook charm work and walked him patiently through the older curse-breaker layer of warding that did not rely on incantations, only on intention and pattern, and which took years to learn well and a lifetime to master. Harry was not a master. He was, however, no longer a schoolboy. He laid a perimeter of notice, set to him alone, that would whisper at the back of his neck if anyone with magic crossed it, and that would lie quiet for any creature with none. He laid a second perimeter inside the first of caution that would warn him before anyone with hostile intent, not merely magical intent, hostile intent, came within 50 yards of the cabin. He laid a third, only on the cabin itself, of misdirection that would smudge the eye of any incidental passerby. He did not lay anti-apparition wards. He did not yet have the energy. He would lay them by the end of the week. He stood in the middle of the room when he was done, and felt the small, soft hum of his own work settle into the floorboards. The wards took to the cabin willingly. Wards always took to old wood and old stone willingly. New buildings were stubborn. This place had been a home long enough to know how to be one. He lit the wood stove. He boiled water. He sat at the long pine table with a cup of tea that he had brought all the way from Grimald in a small tin, and he watched the rain on the back window for a while, and the light went out of the day and forks slid quietly into evening, and he did not move except to refill the kettle once. He felt in his chest the smallest unfamiliar thing. It took him a moment to identify it. It was the absence of pressure. Nobody knew where he was. Not Hermione, who had a continent, not Kingsley, who had a continent, not the Prophet, which had a continent and a half. Nobody in any direction was pulling on him. He felt the rope at his sternum, the rope that the entire wizarding world had had hold of for 10 years, slacken and slacken and slacken, and at last fall gently to the floor, like a hawser cut clean from a moored ship. He put his head down on the table on his folded arms. He cried briefly, for the first time in a year, not with the particular grief of any one death, but with the cleaner, harder grief of a young man who had finally been allowed to set a thing down that he had not realized he had been carrying. Then he wiped his face on his sleeve and went back to his tea. That evening, after he had eaten, a tin of soup he had brought in his pack and a piece of bread he toasted on the stove, he went out into the woods. He walked until he was a quarter mile from the cabin, by a creek bend where the moss came up to mid-calf. He sat on a fallen log. He listened. He heard the creek and the wind and the small rustles of small animals settling for the night. He heard very faintly, far away to the east, a wolf, or what he took at first for a wolf, and then the call sounded again, a half-tone lower than any wolf he had ever heard, with a roundness in it that was not quite an animal sound. He listened, but the sound did not come a third time, and he filed it away and waited for whatever else the woods had to tell him. Atlas dropped onto his shoulder so silently he did not notice the approach. He noticed only the sudden dry, warm weight of the bird, and the slight involuntary turn of his head as the bird shifted, and the small rasping click of beak against feather as Atlas preened his own breast in the proprietary way he did when he had had a long flight. "Hello, you," Harry said. He raised a finger and rubbed the bird's chest under the ruff. Atlas tolerated it for the count of 3, and then bit the finger gently, in mock complaint, and bowed his head for more. "Good crossing," Atlas hooted once low in his throat. The hoot meant, "I have flown over an ocean and I expect dinner." Harry laughed quietly. "I've got jerky," he said. "I'll buy you something better in the morning. Come on." He carried the bird home through the dark. The bird halfway took off again of his own accord and circled the cabin once and landed on the porch rail, where he sat with his head turned to one side, considering the front door, until Harry opened it for him. Later, much later, when the stove had burned down to coals and Harry had banked it carefully and was laid out on the narrow bed in the back room with the cloak folded under the pillow and the stone on its chain warm against his sternum, he heard again the call from the east. He turned his head toward it on the pillow. He listened. The call came once. The call did not come again. He thought mildly before sleep took him, "There is something else in these woods, something not quite." He noted it the way he noted anything he might later need. He set it aside. He slept deep and long and dreamed of a corner with a maple tree, and a girl in a yellow coat standing across the street, looking at him as if she had been waiting. In the morning he went into town. He bought a pound of coffee. He bought eggs and bacon, and a loaf of bread and 3 apples and a tin of butter and a packet of strong black tea, because the tea at the diner had been adequate and the coffee at Maddie's had been unexpectedly good, but his own tea had nearly run out. He bought a wool blanket at the hardware store. He bought a small clean pad of paper and a pen at the bookshop, which had opened. He registered the bookshop owner, a thin man with iron-gray hair and the wary smile of a small-town intellectual who had been waiting all decade for someone to walk in and ask for a French novel, and made a note to come back. He registered the woman at the post office, who had looked at him the way Maddie had looked at him, with the easy assessment of a small place. He registered the sheriff again, who had passed him on the street again, with the same patient flick of the eye and the same uncatalogued nod. He registered, walking past it, a long, low building with the words QUILEUTE tribal offices painted in red on a sign, which he had not known to expect, and which he stored, in the way he stored such things, as an item he did not yet understand and would learn about as soon as it was useful. He registered last, on his way back to the bus stop with his bags, a man on a porch on the far side of the street who was looking at him in a way that the rest of the town had not. The man was old, truly old in the way of men who had lived hard outdoor lives and were now sitting on porches. He was thin. He had long iron-gray hair tied at the nape of his neck. He had a face like a creek bed. He was not white. He was sitting on a kitchen chair on the porch with a coffee cup in one hand, and he had been watching Harry for the full block of his approach, and as Harry came past, the old man did not look away. Harry slowed. He did not stop. He nodded. The old man did not nod back. The old man instead said one quiet word that Harry did not catch in a language Harry did not know, and then in English he said, "Boy." Harry stopped then. He turned. He set the bags at his feet on the wet sidewalk and he straightened. "Sir, you are something I have not seen in a long time." Harry waited. "I do not know what you are," the old man said after a moment. "I know you are not what I am. I know you are not what they are." He inclined his chin faintly north and east, in the direction of the Cullen house Harry had not yet seen and did not yet know to look for. "I know you have a thing on you that hums." Harry kept his face quiet. He let his hand stay loose. "My grandfather," the old man said, "told me about a man who walked through the village in a winter when I was very small. The man came one night and was gone in the morning and never came back. The man was," my grandfather said, "a man with the smell of long candles on him. My grandfather said that man could put his hand on a fevered child and the child would breathe again. My grandfather said the man had walked from a place he did not name and was going to a place he did not name. The man would not eat what we offered him. The man asked for nothing. The man walked through and was gone. My grandfather said, that man is older than he looks." Harry did not in that moment breathe. "Sir," he said after a measured beat, "I am only a man who writes. I am only here for the quiet." The old man considered him. The old man's face did not change. The old man took a small, slow sip of his coffee. Then right quietly, the old man said, "And do not make a noise here. There is a peace in this place that took a long time to make. You do not know about it yet. You will. When you do, you will respect it or you will not be welcome. Do you understand?" "I understand, sir." "Quil atara, Harry," he said, "black." The old man's mouth moved very faintly at one corner, the smallest possible smile. "Of course," he said. Harry picked up his bags. He nodded again and walked on and did not look back. He felt the old man's eyes on his back for a full block. He did not write Hermione that night. He did not have the words, yet, for what he had walked into. He sat on the porch of the cabin in the early dark with Atlas on the rail beside him, and he listened. And somewhere far away to the east the call came again, twice, low and round, and once more after a pause. And this time he understood that there were three voices, not one, and that they were talking to one another across the long forested miles between them, and that the language they were using was older than any he knew. He went inside. He warded the door for the night. He slept. In the morning he walked back into town for milk. By the corner of Forks Avenue and Russell Street by the Maple, a girl in a yellow coat was waiting. Chapter 3, End Chapter 4, Convergence. She was smaller than he had expected. He had not known he had expectations until he saw her and found them being reorganized. He had expected, from the half-dream he had carried out of sleep, a woman tall enough to meet him at the eye, in a yellow coat, with a face he could not quite see. The woman on the corner was perhaps 5 feet tall in her boots, and the coat was the color of butter. Her hair was very black and cut short, and it was wet with the morning rain in a way that did not seem to bother her, and she was holding a pastry box in both hands as if the box were the reason she had come down to the corner, which Harry knew, immediately and exactly, that it was not. She was looking at him. She was looking at him with the patient, unembarrassed steadiness of a person who had decided, before he had arrived, what was going to happen on this corner. He had known a number of people in his life who looked at him that way. None of them had been a woman of 25 in a yellow coat with a pastry box. He paused at the curb. He did not cross. The maple just beside him dropped a single red leaf, which spiraled past his shoulder and landed wet on the sidewalk at his feet. He had cast a small notice-me-not when he had left the cabin. He had cast it because Quill Atara had unsettled him a little and because he had decided, walking, to be a quieter ghost in this town for a few more days. The charm was not a strong one. It was the kind a wizard cast in passing, for the small purpose of becoming furniture. She had walked toward him across the street, through the charm as if it were not there, and stopped on the far curb where he had been about to step off. And then he had not stepped off and she had paused, and now she was watching him with a small expression on her mouth that he eventually decided to read as patience. She did not call across the street. She waited. After a count of about 10 he crossed. He came up slowly, the way he came up to a horse that he did not know yet, and he stopped at a courteous distance, and he set his bag of milk and bread on the bench by the maple, and he straightened with his hands at his sides. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. The pause was held an extra beat. She tilted her head. "You're not from around here," she said. I thought not." "I thought you might think not," she smiled. It was a quick, surprising smile, and it had something in it of the way a small bell sounds. He had not been smiled at like that in some time. He had not been smiled at like that perhaps ever. "I'm Alice," she said. "Harry. Harry. Pleased to meet you. Pleased to meet you, Alice." "I brought croissants," she said, holding out the box. "From the bakery in Port Angels. It is the only good bakery within 40 miles. I drove 40 miles for them this morning. I did not know I was going to. I find I have one too many. Would you like one?" He looked at the box. He looked at her face above the box. He considered briefly and with great honesty the situation. Atlas had not warned him. The wards on the cabin had not pulled at him on the way in. There was nothing visibly unsafe about a woman in a yellow coat, with a box of croissants on a Thursday morning in a small American town. There were a great many things invisibly notable about her, chief among them that she was not warm. She was standing close enough now that he could feel the temperature of her, or rather, the absence of it at the edges. She did not breathe in any of the small, ordinary ways a person breathed. She did not need to. He had read enough by 20 to know what he was looking at. He had not, in his small, careful prior life, thought he would ever stand on a curb in a Pacific Northwest town and have a vampire offer him a croissant. He found that the shape of the situation had a small, dry, absurd elegance that he liked. "I would like one very much," he said. "Thank you." She lifted the lid. He took one. She watched him take it with the faintest curiosity, as if she were studying the way his fingers closed over a pastry. He bit into it. It was, he found, a remarkable croissant. "This is very good," he said. "I told you, 40 miles is not too many. I drive fast. I do not doubt it." She smiled again, and this time the smile had a shadow of something more in it, something warmer, and she stepped, just barely, sideways, so that they were not standing so squarely facing each other, but instead in the loose, adjacent way of two people walking briefly together. He took her cue. He picked up his bag from the bench and shouldered it. They began, without anything having been said about it, to walk slowly south down Forks Avenue toward the park. "Are you visiting?" she said. "I'm renting." "Ah, the cabin out on Calawa," he glanced at her. "How did you—" "It's a very small town," she said easily. "It is the only available rental in 20 miles. Mrs. Newton told the woman at the post office, who told my father's nurse, who told my father, who told my mother, who told all of us at breakfast this morning. By tonight everybody from here to La Push will know your name. Susan Newton told me she did not call and did not visit. Susan Newton does not call and does not visit. Susan Newton tells the post office instead to do the calling and visiting on her behalf." "I see," he said, and he laughed briefly, and the sound of his own laugh was unfamiliar enough to him that he registered it separately from the conversation. She heard the thing he had registered. He did not yet know that she could read tone like a fingerprint. She did not show that she had heard it. She walked on beside him. "Is your father a doctor?" he said. "He is." "At the hospital here?" "At Forks General, yes." "I see. He's the new chief of internal medicine. We moved here 9 years ago. He keeps thinking we'll move on. We never quite do." "Why not?" "Forks is—" She paused, the way a person pauses to choose a phrase with which she has private affection. "Forks is the kind of place that lets you not be looked at. We like that." He looked at her. She did not look back at him. She had the polite ease of a person who was perfectly willing to walk side by side with a man she had just met without filling all the air between them with talk. "That," he said after a moment, "is the same reason I came. I had a hunch." He considered her. He did not speak. He let the count of 3 pass. "Alice, yes, you are a very direct woman. I am sometimes. Are you direct with everyone?" "No," she said. "Only with people I have decided will not mind." "What if I had minded?" "Then I would have been pleasanter and blander, and you would have eaten the croissant and gone on your way and probably not seen me again, and I would have read about you in the local paper in 5 years when you finished your book, and I would have thought of you fondly. That's a contingency plan." "I have many," she said. "I make them quickly." "I see," he said again. He had said it twice in 3 minutes. He noticed that. He thought about it. They walked another half-block in silence. The park unfolded ahead of them, a wet small green with a bandstand at one end and a single bench beside a chained-up bicycle. They did not go into the park. They turned as one by the unspoken instinct of two strangers learning each other's pace and walked back the way they had come. The pastry box was still in her hand. "I have a question," he said. "Yes." "How did you know I was on the corner?" She did not answer at once. She walked perhaps half a dozen steps. Then she said with a careful, bright honesty he found on hearing it that he had known was coming, "I saw you before you came." He kept walking. He did not turn his head. "How long before?" 5 days. "What did you see?" "I saw you stepping off a greyhound. I saw your owl. I saw a man following you. I saw—" She paused, and then with the same brightness, "I saw the leaves of this maple here hanging in the air around us both." He stopped walking. He stopped on the wet pavement 4 feet from the maple, and he turned and he looked at her. She turned with him. She had stopped about a step further on. She was a small woman in a yellow coat with a pastry box in her hand, and her eyes, the eyes he had not until that moment really looked at, were not the color of any human eyes he had seen. They were a soft, deep gold, the kind of gold that has had time to settle, and they were looking at him without flinching. He breathed slowly and let the breath out. "Alice," he said. Yes. You are not, please correct me if I am wrong. You are not by chance in the habit of seeing things before they happen. That is how it has always worked, yes. And you saw me. I saw you. Specifically, as I came into town, you saw me. Yes, he considered. He had considered, in fact, on the walk into town that morning. While Atlas circled overhead, the small problem of the strangeness of the night before, the quiet stares of the locals, Quil Atara's three-dialect speech on the porch, the round wolf calls in the eastern trees, and he had concluded that this was a place with more layered occupants than he had known in advance, and that he would have to be careful, and that he would have to learn what each layer was. He had not concluded that any one of the layers was going to introduce itself to him on the second morning by waiting for him with a French pastry. He laughed. It was a short, surprised laugh. He turned his face up to the rain for a moment and laughed up at the sky, and then he lowered his face and looked at her, and he was still smiling a little, and the small, worn smile he had not used for anyone in a long time was on his mouth. "You don't seem afraid," she said quietly. "I'm not. You should be a little. People are usually a little." "I have," he said, "a great deal of recent experience with the strange. It does not unsettle me as it might." "All right, Alice." "Yes." "You said you saw a man following me." A small flicker. The brightness of her face did not change, but he saw, for the first time, the underlying steadiness of her. It was a steadiness like granite. "Yes," she said, "in the same vision. In the same vision, 20 feet behind you in a doorway across from the diner. He was hooded. He had a wand in his sleeve. I could not see his face." "Was he there yesterday?" "No," she said. "I would have known. I would have come." How would you have known?" "I have the vision of you," she said evenly, "and around the vision I have a kind of attention I cannot exactly explain. It is the second sight. It runs on a kind of background. If something I have seen comes near it, it pulls at me." "All right. You are not unsettled by this." "Alice, I am not unsettled by this." She looked at him with a small, considering tilt of her head. The yellow of the coat in the wet light was a particular soft yellow. The pastry box was still under her arm. Her hair was wet. She looked 23, and she looked, in some other way he did not have words for yet, much older. She was looking at him as if she were memorizing him. He was perhaps looking at her in the same way. He registered the maple beside them. He registered in his peripheral attention the wet leaves on the curb. The wind picked up. 3 of the leaves on the curb lifted. Then 5. Then a dozen all at once in a slow drifting suspension. The way leaves do not actually behave on a windy curb of a small American town, hanging in the air around the 2 of them at about waist height. The way leaves hang in old paintings of saints when the painter wants you to know that something invisible is happening. She looked at the leaves. She looked at him. He was holding very still. "Are you doing that?" she said very quietly. "I think we might both be doing it," he said. "I'm not doing anything." "I think you are. I don't think you know it. I think the same kind of attention you said runs in the background. I think mine has a similar one. I think they are recognizing each other. I think that's what is going on with the leaves." She kept looking at the leaves. They hung. They did not fall. They drifted very slowly in soft, small spirals that owed nothing to the breeze. "I'm a witch then," she said conversationally. "No," he said, "or yes, in a manner of speaking, but not in the way I am. You are something else, something I haven't seen before. I have a great deal to learn, evidently." "So have I, yes." She looked at him. He looked at her. The leaves, after a long moment, fell very softly all at once, like a held breath let out, and lay back on the wet pavement around their feet. She let out a small breath of her own, the kind that wasn't strictly necessary but that her body apparently still wanted to make sometimes. She looked at him another long moment, and then, very calmly, the way a woman who had decided something speaks, she said, "Will you come for dinner? With your family? With my family? Tonight?" Tonight. He considered her. He had a list in his head of all of the reasons that going to dinner with a family of vampires on his second day in a strange town was not the kind of thing a person with even minimal self-preservation did. He went through the list. The list took perhaps 3 seconds. "Yes," he said, 6 o'clock. "All right. I'll write the directions on a card." She had a small leather case in her pocket. She produced it neatly and produced a pencil from somewhere about her person and wrote the directions in a fine, quick hand that ought not to have been physically possible at that speed and was anyway. She handed him the card. He took it. The card was warm from her body. The card was not warm at all, in fact, it was at the temperature of the air. He stored that too, alongside everything else. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for not running," she said. I had a 15% estimate that you would. I'm pleased to have been wrong." 15%, he said. "Possibly 17. He laughed again. It was the second time. He had not laughed twice in a single morning in 2 years. He thought about that for a second and then he didn't, and the not thinking was a small, clean thing. 6 o'clock, he said. 6 o'clock. Alice, yes. You said you saw me before I came. Yes. You were standing in the vision where you are standing now. You were watching me. You had a particular look on your face." "Yes." "What was the look?" She paused. She did not look away from him. "It was the look I have," she said evenly, "when something I have been waiting for finally comes through the door." He held her eyes. He did not speak. She did not make him speak. 6 o'clock. She said again, gently, after a long moment, and she turned and walked away across the street. And he stood there with the card in his hand and the bag of milk on his shoulder, and the pastry crumbs at his feet for a full minute before his heart, which had at some point begun to work harder than it usually did, settled. He went home the long way. He needed the walk. He took the side road past the bookshop and looped around through the small residential streets where the houses sat close together with their wet roofs. He did not pass Quil Atara's porch on the way back. The old man's porch was empty. He registered the absence with the same attention he had given the presence the day before. At the cabin he set the milk and bread on the counter. He did not put them away. He sat down at the long pine table and laid the card with the directions flat in front of him and looked at it. The directions were short. The directions ended with a small, precise note in the same fine hand. "We will be expecting you. Please do not eat first." He read the last line 3 times. The third time it made him laugh out loud. Alone in the cabin, with the rain on the roof. The small, involuntary laugh of a man who is being treated at last by someone with a sense of humor. He laid the card flat on the table. He put the milk and the bread away. He sat at the table the rest of the morning, with the card still flat in front of him, and he did not write Hermione yet, and he did not yet know what he was going to say to her, but the heaviness in his chest, which had been the constant background music of 2 years, had moved aside half a step, and the small bright space it had moved aside to make was full, briefly, of the particular yellow of a coat at a curb under a rainy sky. Up on the hill above the river in the white house with the great glass wall, Alice came back through the front door without making a sound, and Esme, who had been in the kitchen, looked up from the stew she had been making for show, and Carlyle, who was on the stairs, paused. "Well," Esme said very gently. Alice took off the yellow coat. She hung it on the rack. She looked at her hands briefly and then up at her mother. "He's coming for dinner," she said. Esme smiled, the way she did when she wanted to ask many things and would not ask any of them. "Then I had better stop pretending to make a stew." Carlyle came the rest of the way down the stairs. "Alice," he said. "He knows," she said. "He saw." "He saw what?" "He saw what we are. I didn't tell him he saw. And he did not run." Carlyle nodded once slowly. He took her hand. "All right," he said. "Then we will be ready for him." "Yes, 6 o'clock, 6 o'clock." She did not let go of his hand immediately. She looked up at him. Her face just then had a quality Carlyle had not seen on her face in some time. He filed it away, the way Carlyle filed everything without remarking on it. He squeezed her hand gently and let it go and went up to find Esme, and the house arranged itself in its small economic way for the unfamiliar event of a guest. Chapter 4 in Chapter 5. Recognition. The directions on Alice's card took him along a paved road that turned to gravel that turned to earth, and into a long alley of cedar that had the deliberate quiet of a planted approach, and at the end of the alley the trees opened, and the house stood at the head of a clearing as if it had grown there. It was not a house Harry had been expecting. He had been expecting a fork-style farmhouse, or a builder's lodge, or one of those white square American things with shutters. The Cullen house was glass on 3 sides. It had been designed with its setting in mind, the way a museum is designed, low and long and pale, with a deep eave that absorbed the rain into a soft, constant gutter sound. There were 3 cars in the open garage off to one side, a silver Volvo, a red convertible, an enormous matte black truck. There was a porch with a lantern lit, and the lantern was electric, and through the long lit window of the front room he could see, before he had finished crossing the lawn, 6 people arranged at a quiet distance from one another in the careful pose of a family that had been told to look casual. He came up the steps. The door opened before he had knocked. He was not surprised. He had expected as much. Carlyle Cullen on the threshold in a soft gray wool sweater and a pair of dark trousers with a careful diplomatic warmth in his face was the kind of man Harry had encountered at the very upper end of the Wisengamot, the kind who had decided, decades earlier, that he would meet the world as a guest no matter where he stood, and who had practiced the manner of guesthood until it was, in him, indistinguishable from grace. "Mr. Black," Carlyle said. "Welcome. Please come in." "Thank you, Dr. Cullen." "Carlyle, please." "Then Harry, please." Carlyle's mouth eased faintly at one corner. "Harry, then," he said. "Come, the rest of the family is in the front room." He stepped inside. The interior of the house had the same careful reserve as the exterior. It had been arranged by a woman with taste and time. The walls were pale. The floor was wide plank oak. The few pictures on the walls were 3 centuries of small, careful things, a tintype of a young man in a uniform, an oil sketch of a stretch of coastline that Harry suspected was Italian, a watercolor of a Paris street in winter that bore a date in pencil, and a pair of initials Harry did not know how to read. There was a fire in a low fireplace. There was a long table set for one, a single place, with a cloth napkin and a glass of water and a plate. The single place, he understood, was for him. He had not until that moment thought about how strange it would be to eat alone in front of an audience of this kind, and now that he was thinking about it, he found he did not particularly mind. He had, after all, eaten alone in a great many less pleasant rooms. Esme came forward first. He had thought, walking in, that he would be most aware in the room of Carlyle. He was not. He was most aware immediately of Esme, who stood from a chair by the fire with the exact, careful smile of a woman who had been a mother in 100 small ways and who knew, when she looked at Harry, that he had not been mothered enough in a long time. "Harry," she said, "I am Esme. Mrs. Cullen." "Esme." "Esme?" She took both of his hands briefly in hers. Her hands were cool and small. She did not hold them long. She let go before he could feel awkward about the temperature and stepped aside and made the tiny gesture that introduced him to the rest. "Edward, my eldest son. Rosalie, my daughter. Emmett, my son. You have met Alice." Edward inclined his head with formal politeness from the piano bench, where he had been not playing the piano. Rosalie nodded with the elaborate civility of a person who was not, at this moment, prepared to approve of his being in the house, and was choosing not to disapprove for the sake of the family. Emmett raised one hand and grinned, and it was a grin that took up half his face, and Harry found, to his own surprise, that he liked Emmett at once. Alice, on the rug, did not stand up. She was sitting cross-legged in front of the fire with a book in her lap, and she looked up at him as he came in, and she smiled at him with her quick small smile, and she did not say anything yet, because she had said the necessary things already that morning, and she did not need to repeat herself. Jasper had come down the stairs behind Carlyle, with Charlotte. They came forward and Carlyle introduced them. Jasper, his middle son, Charlotte, Jasper's wife, and Harry shook Jasper's hand and noted, the way he was noting everything, that Jasper's hand, like Esme's, was cool, and that Jasper was looking at him with the attention of a person who was reading something other than Harry's face, and that Jasper, after a moment, gave him a small, slight nod that suggested, in the way these things do, that Jasper had read what he had been reading and approved of it. "Sit," Esme said gently. "You are tired. I can see you are tired. I have made you a very simple supper, soup and bread and a small cheese plate. I did not want to be too ambitious for our first evening." "That is very kind." "It is not kindness, it is selfishness. I have not had a person to feed in 9 years. You are doing me a favor." He smiled then at her. He had not expected to be able to smile so soon. He sat. The family sat with him in the arranged casualness of an audience that was being careful not to feel like one. Esme brought soup, a brothy thing with leeks and barley, the careful kind a thoughtful host makes for a guest she suspects has been eating poorly, and bread that had clearly been bought that afternoon from the Port Angel's bakery, and butter, and a small wedge of a sharp local cheese. He picked up the spoon. He tasted the soup. The soup was very good. He ate it slowly. He did not pretend not to be hungry. He had decided, walking up the alley, that he would not condescend to them by pretending. He ate. The family talked around him about the small things a family talks about when it has prepared itself to put a guest at ease. A book Edward was reading, a project Esme had finished, a hike Emmett had taken in the Olympic with a memorable accident, the way the rain had been particularly lovely that week. They did not ask him questions. They did not pry. They allowed him, by the simple, polite trick of being interesting on their own, the space to eat his soup. Halfway through, he set the spoon down. He sat back from the table. He folded his napkin carefully across his lap. He looked slowly around the room, at Carlyle, at Esme, at Edward, at Rosalie, at Emmett, at Jasper, at Charlotte, at Alice, and they understood, all of them simultaneously, that the small civilized first part of the evening was concluding, and he was about to do, on his own time and in his own way, what he had come here to do. "Carlyle," he said. He said it without raising his voice. He said it the way Carlyle said things. "Yes. I think I had better tell you what I am and what I have been told you are, and we can compare notes." A small held silence. Carlyle inclined his head. "Please," Carlyle said. "Your eyes are gold," Harry said. "All of you. Even Charlotte's, which I gather are recent." Edward did not eat. "None of you ate, and Esme cooked the food herself, which means none of you intended to eat. The room is several degrees warmer than your skin. Alice came through a notice-me-not charm I cast this morning as if it were not there, which it should not have been, and she did so because, as she tells me, she sees the future, and she had been given my arrival in advance. The maple leaves at the corner of Forks Avenue and Russell Street did a thing yesterday morning that I have not seen leaves do in any country I have visited, and they did it because the field around her and the field around me were, I think, recognizing each other. I am, and I will tell you this directly, because you have been kind, and I think kindness is generally repaid in directness. I am a wizard. There is a thing called wizard kind, which is mostly British in my experience and exists in pockets across most countries, which keeps to itself by long custom and by international treaty. I left it last week. I came here to be quiet for a while. You are vampires, I think. You are the kind that does not feed on humans because all of you have gold eyes, which I have read about in 2 old books and never expected to see, and because Esme made me soup." There was a long silence. It was Emmett who broke it. He let out a low whistle. He's good, Emmett said mildly to nobody in particular. He's quick. Carlyle did not look at Emmett. Carlyle looked for a long moment at Harry. His face had gone, in the way Carlyle's face went, from polite welcome into the steady, focused intensity of a doctor who had been told the diagnosis by the patient and was deciding which of 3 follow-up questions mattered most. "Harry," he said. "Yes. You are right. Thank you, all of it. Thank you. How long have you known?" "Since this morning. Alice told me. The leaves told me a little, your eyes told me the rest." "I see." He looked at Esme. Esme had her hand pressed lightly to the base of her throat, which was the gesture of a woman who would have wept if her body had been built to. She nodded once at Carlyle. Carlyle returned the small nod and looked back at Harry. "And you," he said, "will tell me a little about wizard kind, perhaps, if you are willing. We have lived a long time. We have heard rumors. We have never met one of you." "You would not have," Harry said mildly. "Not unless one of us decided to break the statute, and most of us do not, and the ones that do are usually the wrong sort to be useful company. You are, I think, an exception. I have never met one of yours either. There are, I believe, some treaties between our 2 peoples. I read of them once in passing, but none that has been activated in any century I am familiar with. There is some natural reason for the avoidance, I think. Magic in the way I do it requires a wand and an intent, and the wand can be sensed at distance by, evidently, your kind of thing." He glanced at Alice, "and the intent cannot easily be hidden, and I think your kind has, as a rule, found it inconvenient and unappetizing to be near my kind, and we have, in turn, found you difficult to charm, which makes it inconvenient to be near you. I do not know why Alice can see me. I do not know why Edward, who I am told reads minds, evidently cannot read mine. I do not know why the leaves did what they did. I am willing to find out." "Edward," Carlyle said mildly, "is it true?" "It is true," Edward said. He had not moved from the bench. He had been watching Harry with a careful, frowning attention. "I cannot read him. There is no static, there is no shield, there is simply nothing for me to read. I have never encountered it before. It is pleasant, actually, after 100 years. Harry looked at Edward. Edward met the look. "I am sorry," Harry said. "I imagine that has been, for the most part, useful in your life. To have it not work on a person must be unsettling." "Useful, yes. Unsettling, yes." Edward's mouth moved faintly at one corner. "Refreshing also." "Refreshing. Yes. There is a particular silence about you, Harry, around you. It is restful." Harry did not know how to answer that exactly. He nodded once. "Alice," Carlyle said, "yes. You said the visions of him bloom rather than fork. Has that changed since?" "No," she said. "Tonight, sitting here looking at him, I see possibilities I see more than I am used to. I cannot pin them down. He has not yet decided what he will do in many ways, and so I cannot see what he will. The futures that involve him in this house with us are clear, more or less. The futures that involve him further afield are not." Carlyle leaned back. He pressed his fingertips together. He looked at Harry over the table. "Harry," he said, "what are you running from?" He had asked it without ceremony. Harry, who had spent the walk up to the alley building defenses, found, rather to his surprise, that the defenses had nothing to defend against. Carlyle had asked it in the manner of a doctor in a small examination room asking about a symptom. "Carlyle," he said, "I have been at the center of a war." "How long ago?" 2 years. "How old were you?" "I was at school for the worst of it. I finished the war when I was 18. "I am 20 now." Carlyle's face did not change. Esme's eyes had filled. She turned her face very slightly away. "Tell me about it," Carlyle said gently. "If you can." He could. He had not told this story, in the way he told it now, to anyone. He had told pieces of it to Hermione and Ron, of course, who had been there for almost all of it. He had given a short formal statement to the Wisengamot and a longer formal statement to a select committee, and he had given evasive answers to journalists, and he had told the version meant for children to Teddy 2 summers ago. He had not, in the 2 years since, sat down with strangers in a strange house and given them, in his own words, the long shape of it. He gave it to them now. He told them about Voldemort briefly as a name and a thing. He told them about the prophecy. He told them about his parents. He told them about the long, slow reveal when he had been 11 of what he was. He told them about Hogwarts in passing, a tower, a forest, a lake. He told them about the war's small skirmishes and its single long battle. He did not tell them about the Hallows. He told them about the year of running with his friends and the year of fighting after. He told them, briefly and without dwelling, about the people he had lost. He told them about the diagnosis Hermione had brought him, the morning he had decided to leave. He told them about the long, quiet flight across the Atlantic, and the bus from Seattle, and the cabin on Calloway Road, and Quill Atara on the porch. He spoke for perhaps 40 minutes. Nobody interrupted him. Esme had at some point reached over and taken Carlisle's hand on the table, and Carlisle had let her hold it, and they had not let go through the whole of his telling. Edward's eyes had not moved from his face. Emmett, partway through, had risen quietly and come and sat closer, and was leaning forward on his knees with his elbows on them and a small set jaw. Rosalie had not moved at all. She was watching him with her arms still folded and her mouth still tight. And as he spoke about his godfather and about his godfather's death, and about the way a man could fall through a piece of fabric and never come back, Rosalie's mouth went, very faintly, at one corner, in a movement he had no idea how to read, but which Esme, watching her daughter, recognized as the particular tic Rosalie had when she was changing her mind. He stopped. He had not been speaking for himself. He had been speaking to give them what they were owed for the soup. He reached for his glass of water and drank. "Harry," Carlisle said, and his voice was, for the first time, not perfectly steady. "Thank you. Of course. I will not pretend to know how you have survived it. I will say, we know something about surviving, not the same thing, but something. If we can be useful to you in any way while you are in this place, you have only to ask." Harry did not answer at once. He looked slowly at the family. He looked at Esme's hand on Carlisle's. He looked at Emmett's set jaw. He looked at Rosalie, who was, perhaps, looking at him for the first time the way she had been looking at the rest of the family for 90 years. He looked at Edward, who was, for the first time, smiling very faintly at the corner of his mouth, with something like recognition. He looked at Jasper, whose head was tilted, and at Charlotte, who had tears on her face, actual tears on the face of a vampire who he had been told had not made them in 50 years, and at Alice, who was sitting on the rug with her hands folded in her lap, watching him without expression and without any expression that could be called less than full attention. "Thank you," he said after a long moment. "I thank you." Carlisle inclined his head. "Eat your bread," Esme said gently with a wet small laugh. "It has gone cool. I will warm you another piece." "Don't," he said a little hoarsely. "It's lovely." He ate the bread. He ate the cheese. He drank the rest of the soup. He took 2 small, slow servings of an apple compote Esme had not initially mentioned, but which arrived without ceremony at the end of the meal. He did all of it under the quiet, steady warmth of a family that had elected, in the way the very old sometimes do in the space of a single evening, to fold him in. Later, in the long room with the glass wall, after the table had been cleared and a kettle had gone on for him by Esme's hand at the kitchen counter, a kettle of his sort of tea, which she had bought somehow that afternoon, he stood at the great window with Carlisle and Edward and Alice, and watched the rain fall on the river 200 yards down through the trees, and they talked, the 4 of them in low voices, about things that would matter very soon. He showed Carlisle his wand. He cast a small light on his palm, and the small light was very steady. He cast, more carefully, a small charm of warmth that took the chill out of the window pane. Edward, who had been watching, said, "I felt that." "In what way?" "At the back of my throat, like a struck bell." "Edward, I will be casting routinely as long as I am in your area. If it is unpleasant, I can make it less so." "It is not unpleasant, it is different. Please carry on." Alice, who had drifted up beside him, slid her hand under his elbow without looking at him. "Show Carlyle the cloak," she said. He looked at her. "You have seen it." "I have seen many things." Show him. He had brought it. He had brought, against his better judgment, all 3 of the Hallows in his pack. Because he had not wanted to leave any of them unattended in a cabin he had only spent 2 nights in, and because he was not, despite his best intentions, ever going to leave them anywhere again. He took the cloak from the inner pocket of the coat where he kept it folded, and he opened it, and he put it on, and Edward beside him took an audible step back, because Edward, who could not see Harry's mind, could now also not see Harry's body, and Edward had not encountered, in 100 years, the particular vertigo of looking at a person who was simply not where he ought to be. Carlyle had let out a small breath. "It is," Carlyle said. "It is very old," Harry said. "Older than most of what wizard kind owns. It is, in fact, the oldest thing I have. There is a story about it and about 2 other objects, but I will not, Carlyle, I will not tell that story tonight. Not because I do not trust you, because it is a long story and I am suddenly very tired." "Of course." He took the cloak off. Edward exhaled. Edward had not, of course, needed to inhale. His exhale was pure mannerism, the kind of mannerism a person who has been 100 years a person makes without noticing. Alice's hand was still under Harry's elbow. He did not move his elbow. "Will you stay tonight?" Esme asked from the doorway after a while. "I have made up the guest room. I should have made it up on principle, of course, but I confess I made it up on speculation." He looked at Esme, he looked at Carlyle, he looked at Alice. "Would you mind very much," he said, "if I went home to the cabin? I have wards, I have an owl. I have not slept under a roof I did not ward in a long time." "Of course," Carlyle said. "Of course. I will come back tomorrow if I am welcome." "You are welcome any day, any hour." "Then tomorrow." Alice walked him to the door. They walked slowly across the wide room. He paused at the rack to take his coat. She helped him into it without making a fuss about it, which was a kindness he was not at present equipped to refuse. She opened the door. He stood on the threshold. "Alice." "Yes." "This is not how I expected my second day in Forks to go." "No, were you expecting nothing?" "I was expecting, very specifically, nothing. I was expecting to drink tea and eat bread for 6 months and then maybe write a postcard." "I'm sorry to disappoint you." "Alice." "Yes." "You haven't disappointed me," she smiled. The smile was small. Her hand was still on the door. She did not let it go for a second. "Good night, Harry." "Good night, Alice." He went down the porch steps. He did not look back. He was very aware that she was standing in the doorway behind him, and very aware that his back had a particular straightness to it for the first time in a year. And he walked the long alley of cedars to his rented car with the small private smile of a man who, for the first time in a very long time, had been seen, and had not had to lie about what he was. Atlas met him at the cabin. Atlas came down through the open back window and landed on the rail of the porch and made a small, low, chuckling sound that was, in him, the sound he made when he was pleased about something. "I know," Harry told the bird. "Don't gloat." He warded the cabin. He banked the stove. He went to bed. He slept without dreaming, for the first time in 2 years. Far away, in another country, in a long stone room without windows, a man with very pale long hair received an owl, and read the letter the owl had brought, and smiled, very slowly, with a mouth that had not smiled in a long time. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. Shadows from the East. Rabbastan Lestrange did not look like a man on the run. He had spent 22 years in Azkaban and 18 months in the slow, patient hard work of getting back into a body that could be looked at without alarm. And he had succeeded. He had done it on a stolen yacht in the Aegean, and then in a cheap hotel in Tangier, and then on the strength of a forged Argentine passport in a small house in Sao Paulo. And by the time he had crossed the Atlantic on the back of a freighter for which he had paid in coin, he had restored the long, pale Lestrange face to a version of itself that did not draw the eye of any port officer in any country he passed through. He looked in his 50s like a man who might once have taught philosophy at a small university. He kept his hair cut short and combed back. He kept his clothes simple. He had stopped wearing rings. What he had not stopped doing was thinking about Bellatrix. He thought about her in the way a man thinks about a wound he has decided not to let heal, not because he could not, but because the wound was the most useful thing he had left to use. He thought about her every morning when he woke in whatever bed in whatever country, and every night before he slept. He thought about her when he ate. He thought about her when he poured his tea. He thought about her when he laid his cheek against the small dark piece of parchment he had stolen, on his way out of Azkaban during the breach, from a forgotten box of evidence in a room nobody had been into in years. A piece of parchment seeped, in 1979, with 3 drops of her blood, kept by Bellatrix in a locket she had since lost, and which had been used at the time for a scrying test against an Auror who had tried to track her. The parchment, after all that, still had her in it. He could feel her in it. The parchment had been telling him, since the day he had stolen it, where Harry Potter was. It had told him London for a year. It had told him London long after Harry Potter had gone, because the parchment did not always know the difference between presents and recent presents, and when presented with a destination, would lock onto a place where the boy had been deeply for a decade and refuse, for stubborn weeks, to update itself. It had told him London for a long time. It had told him on a Tuesday 3 weeks ago Heathrow. It had told him that Wednesday Seattle. It had told him by Thursday a small town on a coast in a country he had never set foot in. He had bought the ticket. He had crossed the ocean. He had walked into Forks, Washington, on a damp evening in early autumn, in the boots and trousers and gray coat of a man who looked like nobody in particular. And he had taken a room above the only inn that did not require a credit card, and he had been very careful, and he had stood, the next afternoon, in the doorway across from the diner and watched. He had watched the boy step off the bus. He had watched the boy walk away. He had decided not to act yet. He had decided not to act because he had read the boy. He had not been a Death Eater for the pleasure. He had been good at it. He could see from a doorway what Harry Potter had become in 2 years, and he could see that the boy was not going to fall to a curse from a distance the way his Aunt Bellatrix had fallen. Bellatrix, beautiful, mad, taken down by a witch who had been baking biscuits the previous afternoon. He could see that there would be one chance. He intended to take it correctly. He intended to take it after he had insurance. He had written a letter that night. In a long stone room without windows, in the city of Volturi, under the smell of wet stone and incense, Arrow Volturi received a letter brought by an owl that had flown for 9 days, and considered it. He sat on the white marble of his throne. He held the letter in long, pale fingers. He had read it 3 times. He smiled, the small, slow smile he wore when he was thinking, and then he laughed very softly in a way that the only other vampire in the room, Marcus on the throne beside him, indifferent as ever, did not even bother to mark. "Marcus," Arrow said, "how extraordinary. Do you know what this is?" Marcus did not look up. "A boy, Marcus, a wizard boy. The boy has come into the territory of our Carlisle. The writer of this letter, who is a wizard himself, who is hiding from his own kind in our part of the world, offers to deliver him to us, in exchange for our help in killing him. Imagine." "I do not imagine," Marcus said. He said it without particular feeling. He had not had particular feeling about anything in 2 centuries. Imagine, anyway, Arrow said. He folded the letter in half against his palm and tapped it twice slowly against his lower lip. A wizard, a young wizard, a young wizard with a gift. A gift our correspondent describes, let me see, he describes as the curious capacity to refuse death. A boy who has, we are told, survived a particular curse that does not allow survival. A boy who carries on his person 3 objects of singular note, though our correspondent admits he has not seen them himself. A boy who, by all reports, has not aged in the 2 years since the death of a particularly unpleasant magical tyrant of the British species. Marcus. Imagine, Marcus did not. Demetri, Arrow said. Demetri was already in the doorway. Demetri was always in the doorway when Arrow began a sentence with his name. He bowed the small, dry, economical bow that had been his bow for 100 years. Master, pack a bag, take Jane. Take 2 of the regular guard. Go to a small town in the Pacific Northwest of America called Forks. Do not be seen by Carlyle's family until I tell you to be seen. Find this boy. Confirm what you find. Send word the moment you have. Do not take him, Demetri. Do not take him yet. He is too interesting to spoil with haste. Master. Jane is to be discouraged from her usual creativity until I authorize it. She may, if useful, demonstrate herself. She may not damage the boy. Master, be patient, Demetri, be patient as you are. This is not a chase, this is a tasting. Master, Demetri left. Arrow held the letter in the air a moment longer. He read the signature again. Lestrange. He had not heard the name in 180 years. He had heard, once in the 18th century, of a French Lestrange who had married into a Belgian wizard family that had crossed paths, briefly, with one of his cousins. The Lestranges had been, by report, an old line, and the old lines, in his experience, ran reliably to a certain shape of mind. He folded the letter into the small ebony box at his elbow. He closed the box. He smiled slowly, the smile of a man who had just been handed, on a day he had not expected anything at all, a present. Marcus, he said, yes. Do you ever feel that you have lived too long? Constantly. It is interesting, is it not, when something comes along that makes you feel, for a moment, you have not. Marcus did not answer. Arrow had not really been speaking to him. In Forks, in a meadow north of the cabin on Calloway Road, Harry was teaching Alice, with great patience and with great care, to feel the shape of a wand. He had not intended to teach her anything. It had begun, that morning, 3 days after the dinner, as a casual demonstration he had offered when she had asked, in the offhand, cheerful way she asked everything, what wandwork actually looked like. He had taken her into the meadow because the cabin was no place for live work, and he had cast, slowly, a series of small, ordinary charms, a flame in his palm, a flock of paper birds out of the leaf litter, a careful summons of a fallen pine cone from 20 feet away, and Alice had watched, and had then, without saying anything about it, lifted her hand, and the pine cone she had been looking at on the ground had risen 6 inches into the air and hung there. Harry had looked at her. Alice had looked at the pine cone. She had set it down. She had said, with the small, careful brightness of a person who had just discovered that a door she had walked past for 100 years was, in fact, unlocked, I think I have been doing that in small ways for a long time. Alice. Yes. Have you always been able to move things by looking at them? Not the way you do. Not the way I just did. I have sometimes been able to make a small thing easier. A cup that was not quite where I had left it. A book that turned to the page I wanted. I assumed it was the way I am, that the visions sometimes leak. I don't think that is what was happening. He had set down his wand on a flat stone. He had crouched beside her in the wet grass. Alice, he had said, will you do something for me? Yes. Will you stop looking at the pine cone and look at me and listen to me very carefully? Yes. He had told her, slowly and with care, the small theory he had been turning since the dinner in the back of his mind. He did not know enough about her to be right. He had said as much. But he had started a few days earlier to suspect that she was something more than a vampire with the second sight, that her gift, which the family had treated as a common enough vampire gift, was perhaps deeper than that. She had been in her human life a girl with an inherited foresight. She had been institutionalized for it. She had been turned for it. He had read once, in passing, in a book on French wizardry, of girls from rural villages in 1700s Mississippi who had had the same inherited foresight, who had been recognized and removed by the local wizarding gendarmerie and given small, careful trainings before being released. He had said, "I think you may have been a witch, Alice. I think you may have been a witch who never came into your inheritance, because you were locked up for it before anyone could recognize what you were. I think you may have been a witch who was then turned, and the turning may not have erased the magic in you, only slept it. I think, Alice, I think the visions have been the surface of it. I think there is more under the surface." She had looked at him. Her small face in the wet meadow had been very still. "Show me," she had said. He had shown her. She had taken to it the way a particular person takes to a thing they have known how to do all along and only now had been told the name of. She did not, of course, have a wand. She had not been given one as a child, the way British wizard children were, and she did not need one as long as the magic was the wandless kind, which is what he had begun her on. She lit a small flame in her palm in the third hour and held it for 9 seconds before it guttered. She made the leaves of the alders at the edge of the meadow turn, in a slow ring around the two of them. She tried with great seriousness. The cone summoned, and the cone came halfway and dropped, and she frowned, and she did it again, and the cone came all the way and landed in her hand, and she laughed, a quick high laugh that she did not seem to know was hers. And Harry felt in his own chest the small, bright, responding pull he was beginning to recognize was always there when she laughed. By the end of the afternoon, she could do 5 things she had not been able to do in the morning. By the end of the next afternoon, 12. Her visions around him sharpened and lengthened in a way she had never experienced, and she told him so on the 3rd evening, sitting on the porch of the cabin with a mug of something he had heated for her on the stove that she would not actually drink, but which he had handed her because the gesture had felt right, and which she had held in her cold, small hands the entire conversation. "They go further," she said, "and they are clearer. I saw, this morning, a horse I will not see for 2 months. I have never had one come that far in advance and that clean. I saw a piano lesson Edward will give in 3 years. I see when I look at you more than I have ever seen of any single person. Tell me." She did not immediately. She looked at the cup in her hands. "I see you, Harry, in 100 different shapes. I see you old. I see you young. I see you in places I cannot name. I see you in places I can, Florence once in a particular street I have walked. I see you with people I do not know, in clothes I do not recognize, in houses I have never been to. I see you in winter in deep snow, surrounded by figures in long cloaks. The cloaks are black." He did not move. He sat very still on the porch step beside her. "How many figures?" "Many, 8, 12, I cannot count them. They are not all of one kind. Some are still, and some are moving. The light is wrong. The vision flickers. I think you have not yet decided in some particular way what you will do at that moment. I cannot pin it. It is very near, though, within a month. You are not surprised. I am not surprised, number. Why?" He looked out across the porch rail at the dark of the trees. Atlas was in the rafters of the porch overhang, one eye open, watching them both with the sleepy proprietary patience he had developed for Alice in the last week. Alice could feed Atlas by holding out her finger and letting him bite it. Atlas's beak could not break her, and Atlas had figured this out within a single afternoon and now sometimes climbed onto her wrist for the affront of squeezing. "I have been in my life," Harry said, "ahead of a great many people who wanted me dead. I have learned to assume when I'm in a quiet place that the people who want me dead have not gone away. They have simply been making travel arrangements." Harry: "Yes. Has anyone in particular been making travel arrangements?" He turned his head and looked at her. "There is one I think of sometimes," he said. "There were Lestranges in the war. There was a woman who is dead. There were 2 brothers. The older brother is also dead. The younger, Rabbastan, was sent back to Azkaban after the war and has been there since. I know there was a transport breach last spring. One of the prisoners escaped. I do not know which. I have not in 2 years asked. I should have. All right, Alice, if it is him, if it is him. He will not be quick. They were always patient, the Lestranges. I will not see him in town walking around. He will be set up somewhere watching, listening. He will be paying somebody. He will have done his homework, and he will not move until he has. All right, all right." She let the cup of tea cool in her hand. The night was very dark around them and the trees dripped, and Atlas, after a while, hopped down from the rafter onto the rail beside her and clicked his beak in approving silence. "Harry, yes, I won't let him." He turned and looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said softly. "All right." The body in the small town of Beaver, 20 miles south, was found the following Tuesday by a man named Earl Thompson, who had run a feed store on the main street for 30 years, and who had stopped in at his neighbor's house at 7 in the morning to drop off a chainsaw blade he had borrowed, and had let himself in by the front door because his neighbor never locked it. The neighbor was a man named Frank Holloway, who had farmed the small lot behind the house for 42 years. Frank Holloway was in the kitchen on the floor beside the kitchen table. Earl could not at first put a name to it. The body had no marks. The eyes were open. The mouth was a little open. There was no blood anywhere and no sign of a struggle. Frank Holloway had, by all appearances, simply lain down on his kitchen floor and stopped. Earl had backed out of the kitchen. Earl had called Charlie Swan in Forks because Earl knew Charlie, and Charlie had been the closest thing Beaver had to a sheriff for so long that Earl forgot in the moment that Beaver had its own sheriff and that he could have called him instead. Charlie had driven down. Charlie had walked into the kitchen. Charlie had stood there a long moment, with his hands in his coat pockets, looking at his old friend on the floor. Charlie had called the medical examiner. Charlie had also, less officially, called Carlisle Cullen at the hospital, because Charlie had, since the cliff-jumping incident with his daughter's friend Bella 4 years back, kept a small private list of strange things that did not have explanations, and Carlisle, over the years, had sometimes had explanations Charlie did not need to write down. Carlisle had come down the same afternoon. Carlisle had not, of course, gone alone. Harry had gone with him. Harry had asked too. Carlisle had said yes the moment Harry had asked, because Carlisle, who had spent a great many years reading symptoms, had read Harry's request the way he had read everything else about him, and had agreed without asking why. Alice had wanted to come, and Harry had told her, gently, that he needed her in Forks for the day, watching the futures, in case the vision sharpened around something he was not present for. The 2 of them had driven down to Beaver in Carlisle's silver Volvo. They had walked into Frank Holloway's kitchen without speaking. The medical examiner had not yet arrived. The body was still on the floor. Charlie had been on the porch with Earl, away from the room, talking quietly. Harry had gone in alone first. Carlisle had stood in the doorway. He had crouched beside Frank Holloway's body. He had laid the back of his hand gently against the man's cheek. He had closed his eyes. When he opened them, his face had a particular quality Carlisle had not seen on him before, flat, very still, the eyes a few degrees darker than they had been an hour before. Carlisle: "Yes, I was right. Lestrange. There is a sigil, not on the body, around it." He left a residue that will have faded by morning. He cast a killing curse here 2 nights ago. The man, I think, opened the door and was killed before he understood what had happened. The body was placed on the floor afterward to seem, on the surface, like a stroke. The sigil, it is a Lestrange family mark. They used to leave them during the war as a calling card. I am the only one in this country who would recognize it. I am the only one in this country who would know to look for the residue at all. He left it for you. He left it for me. Harry, I think, Carlyle, that he is telling me he is here. I think he is telling me he is patient. I think he is telling me he can do this and not be caught, and that he can do it again, and that I should not assume the next house he stands in front of will not be one I know. Carlyle had not answered for a long moment. Harry had stood. He had drawn his wand in the kitchen and had moved it once slowly in a clearing arc around the body, and the small unseen residue of the curse, invisible to Charlie, invisible even to Carlyle's vampire senses, gathered up at the tip of his wand and held there briefly like cold mist, and then dissipated. He had said quietly, a phrase Carlyle did not catch. The body on the floor settled very slightly into a more peaceful arrangement. He had not said anything to Charlie on the way out. He had nodded to Charlie gravely, the nod of one stranger acknowledging another at a death, and Charlie had nodded back, and Charlie had said in his rough, careful voice, "Thank you for coming, Carlyle, thank you, both of you," and they had gone back to the car. In the car on the way home, neither of them had spoken for 15 miles. Then Harry, looking out the window, had said very quietly, "His name is Rabbastan Lestrange. I will tell the family tonight." "All right, I will tell them everything. All right, Carlyle, yes." Killed Frank Holloway because Frank Holloway happened to live alone, in a house I had not been in a town I had not been to, that was within reach of a man who was too patient to come at me directly. He was practicing. He was warming up his wand. He was reminding me what he could do. He was reminding me that the price of taking my time in this country would be paid by people who did not know my name. Harry. Yes. You did not bring him here. He looked across at Carlyle. He waited. You did not bring him, Carlyle said very gently. He brought himself. He has chosen the price of his own patience. You will not let him pay it through you. Do you hear me, Harry? I have had this conversation with myself before in my own life in worse forms, and I have lost it once or twice, and I have learned what it costs to lose it. Do not lose it today. Harry sat very still. He looked out the window. The trees went past. After a long time he said, "Thank you. You are welcome. I will not lose it today. Tomorrow either. Tomorrow either." That night, in the long room with the glass wall, Harry sat down with the family and told them what he was up against. He told them this time the part of his life he had not told them before, the part about the Lestranges and Bellatrix, and the long, slow accounting that had not been settled in any way that would actually stop the last brother from coming. He told them briefly what a killing curse was, and what it could and could not do. He told them about the residue he had read in the kitchen. He told them, with the same flat steadiness he had used in the car, what he believed Lestrange was now doing. "He has a parchment," he said. "He has had it on him, I think, since he escaped. It uses my mother's sister's blood, my mother's sister-in-law's blood, I should say, from my aunt by marriage, and it has been showing him where I am. He cannot be tracked by ordinary means. He is patient. He is good. He will not move until he has insurance. He is, as I mentioned at the dinner, the kind of man who keeps a backup plan in his pocket." He paused. He looked for a moment at his hands. "I think the backup plan is your kind." He said it quietly. The room did not move. "He will have written," he said, "to whomever he thinks will be most interested in the prospect of a wizard who survived the only curse that can kill any of you. He will have offered me in exchange for help to whoever will take the offer." It was Carlyle, eventually, who said the thing Harry was waiting for. "Arrow," Carlyle said. "Arrow, how long ago do you think the letter was sent?" "I don't know. Within the last 10 days, certainly." "And how long from Volturi to Forks? Demetri leaves the same day if Arrow reads it that morning. Yes. Then we have perhaps a week. Perhaps a week. A long silence. It was Rosalie, from the chair by the fire, who, this time, broke it. She had not unfolded her arms in 3 days. She looked in that moment at Harry across the room, with the particular look she sometimes used on Emmett before a fight. It was the look of a woman who had been waiting a long time to break something. "Right," she said. "Then I had better go and clean my boots." Esme made a small sound that might have been laughter. Emmett laughed outright. Edward did not laugh. He was looking at Harry with the particular set jaw he had had in the doorway at dinner the night the cloak had come out. "Carlyle," Harry said. "Yes. I will not stay if it puts you at risk." "Harry, Carlyle." "You are not going anywhere," Carlyle said. He said it without raising his voice. Carlyle never raised his voice. "Did you hear me? You are not going anywhere. We are going to plan together as a family, and we will be careful, and we will be patient, and we will be ready. Do you understand me?" Harry did not answer for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly once. "I understand," he said. Alice, at his shoulder, did not say anything. She had not said anything in 20 minutes. Her hand, however, had found his on the arm of the couch they were sharing, and her cold, small fingers had laced through his with the steady patience of a person who, having decided, would not be moved. He let his fingers stay where they were. The family talked, around them, late into the night, and somewhere in the dark of the woods to the north. 3 voices, round, low, layered, called to one another across the long forested miles, the way they had been calling for 2 weeks, and somewhere south of the river, in a small motel on the Hoe Road, a man with very pale, long hair sat at a small desk by a small window with a parchment laid flat in front of him, and watched the boy's location glow steadily on the parchment in a small white circle, and smiled. With the slow, patient smile of a man who had a week of waiting left in him and intended to enjoy it. Chapter 6, End Chapter 7. The Gathering Storm. The family did not, in the days that followed, descend into the kind of war room Harry had braced himself for. They did not because they were not that kind of family. They had survived a great deal as a family by refusing to organize themselves the way armies organized themselves, and they did not, that week, organize themselves like that for him either. They organized themselves as the Cullens had always organized themselves, by going on with the small, ordinary days and stitching into the hours of those days the careful preparations of a household that intended to continue. Esme cooked. Carlyle worked his shifts at the hospital. Edward, in the evenings, played the piano. Emmett went out into the forest one afternoon, alone, with a small, grim, cheerful expression, and came back at midnight with a bear over each shoulder, and a small set of bruises Rosalie spent a happy hour making fun of. Rosalie cleaned her cars and her motorcycles and her boots, in that order. Charlotte and Jasper, the 2 of whom had decided, without any conversation about it, to stay through whatever was coming, drove to Port Angels and bought a ridiculous quantity of ammunition from a man who knew not to ask questions, and drove back, and then disassembled, oiled, and reassembled every firearm in the house, of which there were 19, a fact that surprised Harry, who had not assumed firearms were of much use to the Cullens, until Jasper explained, mildly, that the older guard of the Volturi were sometimes accompanied by a small number of human attendants who did not have any particular protection against, for instance, a slug from a hunting rifle, and that one accounted, in this work, for everything. Harry, for his own part, did 3 things. He laid more wards. He laid them in concentric rings out from the cabin, and then, when Carlyle quietly suggested it, around the Cullen house too. He laid wards he had been taught in books and wards he had been taught by Bill Weasley, and one ward he made up because the situation seemed to call for it. The cabin and the Cullen house were both, by Wednesday evening, more thoroughly warded than Hogwarts had been most weeks of his 6th year. he taught Alice. She had moved since the night of Frank Holloway, from learning a thing a day to learning 2 things a day, and her visions in proportion had sharpened until they were, by Thursday, of a clarity she said she had not had since she was alive. She could now, at 3 days in, light a flame in her palm and hold it indefinitely, summon small objects to her hand, transfigure a leaf into a small functional metal cup, and produce, when concentrating, a small clear shielding charm that she had learned in 2 afternoons, and that Harry, who had taken half a year to learn the same charm at school, watched her do with the small quiet pride of a teacher he had not realized he was. He wrote to Hermione. He had not written to her since landing. He had been carrying the letter in his head for a week. He sat down on Thursday afternoon at the long pine table with paper and the good pen Hermione had bought him for his 19th birthday and wrote it. He told her about Forks. He told her about the cabin. He told her about the man on the porch who had spoken 3 languages and known what Harry was. He told her about the family. He told her about the girl in the yellow coat. He told her plainly that he believed Rabbastan Lestrange had escaped Azkaban and had followed him across the Atlantic, and that the Lestrange parchment of which he had read the file once at the ministry was almost certainly in Rabbastan's possession, and that there was a body in a kitchen in Beaver, Washington, that a wizard had cast a killing curse on, and that the situation had plausibly drawn the attention of a long-lived Italian institution called the Volturi, which she had probably never heard of, and which she should look up immediately in the upper restricted sections of the ministry library, under the heading Magical Cohabitants Vampire. He asked her not please to come. He asked her instead to find out everything she could find about Rabbastan's escape, to find out whether the breach had been investigated, to find out whether the ministry knew, to find out who, among the surviving Lestrange contacts, had quietly stopped reporting in, to find out whether anyone had been receiving owls from someone who was not officially alive. He asked her, too, to find out whether the ministry had any whatsoever current diplomatic relationship with the Volturi, who he understood functioned as a kind of unofficial vampire crown, and whether there was any treaty or precedent, however weak, that he could lean on. He sealed the letter. He gave it to Atlas. Atlas blinked at him with one round eye as if to say, "Across the entire Atlantic again, you cannot be serious," and then took off and was a small white shape over the cedars and was gone. On Friday morning, Sam Ooley came to the river. He came, as he always came, alone. He came in the heavy waterproof of a man who was unbothered by the weather, with his hands in his coat pockets, and he stood on the south bank of the Saul Duck at the place where the treaty line crossed the water, and he waited, the way the wolves of his line had always waited, until somebody from the other side came down. Carlyle came down. Carlyle had been expecting him. The pack had phased the previous evening. Carlyle and the family had heard the calls, distinct from the regular night calls of the wolves, calls of summons rather than calls of patrol, and Carlyle had assumed, correctly, that the Quilutes had picked up something on the wind that they did not like. Harry had asked to come along. Carlyle had thought about it for a careful second, and then had said yes. They had walked down to the river together, in silence, at a pace that respected the gravity of what was coming. Sam looked up when they stepped out of the trees. He looked at Carlyle. He looked at Harry. His face was, in the way the face of any pack alpha was, a face that did not give away what it was thinking in quantities that did not serve it. He was a tall man in his mid-20s with very black hair cut short, and he had the broad-set shoulders of someone who had grown into his body suddenly and learned to use it at speed. "Carlyle," he said, "Sam, there is a smell on your land." "I know. Sam, I would like you to meet Harry. Harry has been with the family for a fortnight. It is on his account that I know about him." Carlyle paused. He looked at Sam. Sam did not look at Harry. Sam looked at Carlyle with a particular set of the jaw, and Carlyle, who had read Sam's face for 9 years, read it now and waited. "My grandfather's brother," Sam said, "saw a man come through Forks in the winter of 1911. The man came with a thing on him my grandfather's brother could not name. He was not a vampire. He was not one of us. He was something else. He could put his hand on a fevered child and the child would breathe. The story was told in our family. We assumed for 90 years the story was a story. Quill SR came to me 3 days ago and said the man was on a porch on Forks Avenue talking to his great-grandson. He said he had come back. He said this man, this boy, is the same kind. I do not know if he is the same man. Quill SR thinks not. He thinks he is one like him." He looked then at Harry. He looked at Harry for a careful, level count of 3. "I want to know," he said, "what he is." Carlyle inclined his head. He stepped half a pace back. The diplomacy of the moment, he understood, was Harry's now to manage if he wanted to manage it. Harry, who had not raised his voice on the walk down and did not raise it now, stepped to the line of the bank and stood, hands at his sides, and addressed Sam directly. "I am a wizard, Mr. Uli." "What?" "I am. The word is wizard. There is a folk in Britain and elsewhere that does the kind of work I do. We are human. We have, by long custom, kept ourselves separate from the rest of the human world. We do not, as a rule, come into contact with peoples like yours or with peoples like Carlyle's. I have come to Forks because I needed to be somewhere quiet, and I did not know about the treaty between the Cullens and your tribe, and I do not understand it yet, and I am asking you with great respect to teach me what I must know to honor it." Sam did not answer for a long moment. "That is a more polite request," he said at last, "than I am used to receiving from someone on that side of the river. I am sorry. I did not mean to come from this side. I came over the water, sir. I am not, I think, exactly on a side." Sam considered him. Sam, like Carlyle, was capable of long considered silences and used them. "You are not their kind. Number, you are not our kind. Number, you are a third kind. In a manner of speaking, there are not many of us in this country, Mr. Uli, and there are none I know of in the Olympic Peninsula. I will be the only one for some distance. I will not be a problem. I have come here to be quiet. I am sorry to say, I have already brought a problem with me." Sam's face did not change. "The body in Beaver. Yes, that was you. It was a man who has followed me from Britain. I see. I will deal with him. I will not let it happen on your land. It happened on land that is not your land or my land. It happened in a country that does not, as a matter of treaty, belong to either of us. But the principle I take is correct. The principle I take is the courteous thing. Yes. All right, Mr. Uli. Yes. There is perhaps more to say. There are also people coming who are kin to the Cullens. The kind they were before they were what they are now. They are coming because of me. They will not stay long. I would like the courtesy of saying in advance that I will do everything in my power to keep them from your land and from your people, and that if any of them crosses your line, they will have done so against my best efforts." Sam looked at him. "How many?" "I think 4, perhaps 5. "From where?" "Italy." "How long?" "A week, perhaps less." He was silent another moment. "You will tell me when they arrive." "I will." "You will tell me exactly where they are." "I will." "You will tell me immediately if any of them moves toward our line." "I will." "And if any of them crosses, my pack will deal with them, and there will not be a conversation about it. You understand?" "I understand." "All right, Mr. Uli." "Yes. I am asking also, there is an old man on your reservation named Quill Atara. I would like, with your permission, to call on him. There were things in his manner on the porch that I did not understand and which I would like to." Sam's face moved very faintly at one corner, a flicker that, in the particular language of an alpha's face, meant something close to amusement. "Quill SR," he said, "calls on whom he likes. He does not need my permission. If he likes, he will see you. If he does not like, he will not see you. I will not be involved, Mr. Black, in arranging that meeting. I will not be involved, I will say also, in either of the meetings on either end of it so that nobody in either of our communities can later say I was. I will not, however, prevent it. Do you understand? I understand. All right, Mr. Uli. Yes, thank you. Don't thank me. Don't make me regret being thanked. Walk back up to the house. I will go talk to my pack. He turned. He went back up his own bank into his own trees and was gone. Harry stood on the bank a while. Carlyle beside him said very softly, "That was well done, Harry. He is a serious man. He is. He should be. Yes, Carlyle, yes. I am tired. I know. I am not tired in the bad way. I am tired in the way of a person who has been holding something up for a long time and has just had somebody put a hand on it, to help. I know. I am all right just now. I am glad." They walked back up to the house in silence, the kind of silence that needed nothing said in it. Late that night, Alice and Harry sat on the porch of the Cullen house, with their feet against the rail, and the low light of the porch lantern picked out the small details of her face and the low light of his pipe. He had, in the previous week, taken up smoking a pipe, the way men of his uncle's generation in the Muggle world had smoked pipes, on the strength of a second-hand account in a serious letter that had described pipe smoke as the closest thing a man can have to a small portable fireplace. Picked out the small details of his. She had her hand under his elbow, the way she had a habit of doing now without thinking about it. "Harry, yes, I have been having 100 visions a day around you. I know. I have been trying to make a kind of map of them. That sounds like Hermione. It is perhaps a Hermione thing to do. You would like her. I am sure I would." She rested her head briefly against his shoulder. He did not move. After a moment she straightened. "Harry, yes. There are 3 endings I keep seeing. They keep coming back. They are the 3 I cannot pin. All right. In one you leave. Before they arrive. You take the bus south. You disappear into the country. You write me from a town in Oregon. I see the postmark. You stay alive. You do not come back to Forks for a long, long time." He did not interrupt her. "In the second they arrive and we win. They go away, you stay. You stay, Harry. You stay here in this house with us, with me for a long time. I see a Christmas. I see another Christmas. I see snow. I see Esme teaching you how to bake bread that does not depend on the way I see your bread always depending on a small bit of magic that you do without thinking. I see you laugh. I have not yet seen in real life the laugh I see in that vision. I would like to." He was looking at her now. "In the third," she said. She paused. She paused longer than she had paused. "In the third they arrive and we appear to win, and you go with them anyway. I do not understand why. The vision is unclear. You go with them to Italy. You stand in a long stone room. You, Harry, I have not been able to make myself look at the third ending more than once." He took the pipe out of his mouth. He set it down on the porch rail. He turned on the bench to face her. "Alice. Yes. I am not going to leave. Harry, I am not. I am not going to leave. I have spent my whole life leaving. I have been told my whole life that the right thing to do when somebody dangerous wants me is to leave so that the danger leaves with me. I have done it. I have done it for everybody who asked it. I have done it for the people I loved, and it has every time been the wrong thing to do. I have left and the danger has stayed and the people I loved have died anyway. I am done leaving. I am Alice. I am done leaving. Do you hear me? I hear you. And I am not going to Italy. All right. That third one, I will not let it happen. I will see it coming, or you will. We will, between us all, see it coming, and I will not let it happen. All right, Alice. Yes, look at me." She looked at him. Her face, at close range in the lantern light, had a stillness that had begun in the last week to be a stillness he could read. It was the stillness, he had realized, of a small bright person who was paying very close attention to whatever was in front of her, and who, when there was nothing in front of her, spent her time very efficiently at high speed, and who, when there was something in front of her, spent her time on it entirely. "I am here," he said. "I will be here. All right. All right. She did not look away. She did not breathe for a long moment because she had forgotten to, and she remembered after a while in the small mannerism way she remembered, and the small breath came in and went out, and she leaned slowly, the side of her head against his shoulder again, and did not move. He did not move either. The forest around them dripped and dripped. Far away to the south, on the Hoe Road in the small motel above the river, Rabbastan Lestrange laid the parchment flat on the desk. The white circle on the parchment had moved north and slightly east, and was now sitting steadily over the rough position of the Cullen house, where it had been sitting, on and off, for most of the last week. He had read about the family. He had read about them in the small, careful way a man with patience read about things. He had bribed a clerk in the county records office to give him access to the property files that did not exist. He had reviewed the names. He had assembled in his small legal pad a list of the 8 individuals he thought lived in the house, and he had cross-referenced their ages, and he had concluded 2 days ago that these were not, in any ordinary way, 8 people. He had, on this conclusion, written a second letter, and sent it, by ordinary post, to a different address in Volturi than the first. He had also acquired in the last week a small quantity of a substance that the Volturi had used, by quiet rumor, in the 17th century, against a small group of European dueling wizards who had crossed them. The substance was difficult to find. It had cost him most of the gold he had brought across the ocean. He had it in a small lead-lined ampule in the breast pocket of his coat, and he had been thinking about it, in the way a man with a bullet in his pocket sometimes thought about the bullet all afternoon. He laid the parchment flat. He laid his palm briefly on it. He felt faintly the pulse of the boy at the cabin's coordinates, the cabin being currently empty by his calculation, the boy being up at the White House with the family, and he closed his eyes. He thought, very deliberately, about Bellatrix. He thought about her on a bench in the courtyard at Lestrange Manor. He thought about her on her wedding day. He thought about her in the long final week before the battle, when she had still been laughing, when she had still been Bella, in the way only her family had been allowed to call her, in the small private room where the family ate. He thought about her on the floor of the atrium with her wand still in her hand and her eyes still open, and a witch in a housecoat bending over her with an expression Rabbastan had never been able to forget. He opened his eyes. He smiled. He stood up. He took the parchment off the desk. He folded it in 3. He put it inside his coat. He took down from the closet shelf the small gray overnight bag he had been packing in pieces for a week. He checked the bag. He checked the wand in his sleeve. He checked the ampule in his breast pocket. He looked at his face briefly in the small motel mirror over the desk, and he saw a man in his 50s with short-combed hair and the patient eyes of a man at the end of a very long sum, and he smiled again, the small private smile he had been carrying for a fortnight, and he picked up the bag. He left a $5 tip on the dresser for the maid. The Lestranges had always tipped well. It was, Bellatrix had said once, the small good manners of a family that was otherwise impossible, and she had been laughing when she said it, and he could still hear the laugh. He turned out the light. He left the room. In the darkness of the woods to the north of the Cullen house, on the porch of the White House with the great glass wall, Alice Cullen lifted her head sharply off Harry's shoulder, her eyes wide and unseeing, and the cup she had been holding in her free hand fell to the porch boards with a small, clean ring, and she said, in a voice Harry had never quite heard her use before, "He is moving." Chapter 7 and Chapter 8. Confrontation. Lestrange did not come at the cabin. He had not, Harry would later realize, ever intended to come at the cabin. The cabin was warded, and Lestrange knew the cabin was warded, and Lestrange had spent the previous 3 days planting, in the back of Harry's settled habits, the assumption that the cabin was the place an attack would come. Lestrange was a Slytherin in the way the older generation had been Slytherins. He set up his pieces and watched them, and then he moved against the other side of the board. The other side of the board was Forks Avenue at 10:30 in the morning. It had been 3 days since Alice's small, clean cup had fallen on the porch boards. Lestrange had vanished for those 3 days off her foresight, and off the parchment Harry had borrowed back at the Cullen house. Carlyle had asked, gently, the night of the dropped cup, whether there was any way Harry could mirror the trick of the parchment in reverse. And there had been no body in any kitchen in any small town in the peninsula since Frank Holloway, and Sam Ooley's pack had run ranges along the south of the treaty line every night without finding a track. Lestrange had gone perfectly still. The silence had, Harry knew, been intentional. On Tuesday morning, Harry needed a thing he had not needed all week. He needed, specifically, a small length of plain rope, of the kind a person could buy at a hardware store and use for 100 ordinary purposes, and which he wanted that morning, for the perfectly ordinary purpose of finishing a small physical anchor that completed the 3rd inner ward at the cabin. He had checked the parchment that morning. It had shown him no Lestrange anywhere. He had checked Alice's account of the previous night's visions. She had told him with care that she had seen nothing of Lestrange in 18 hours. He had decided on these 2 pieces of evidence that the morning was clear enough for an errand. He had been wrong. He had not been wrong, of course, in any way he could have known to be wrong. He had been wrong because the parchment Lestrange carried was an heirloom of the Lestrange line, and the parchment Harry had borrowed was its functional cousin, and the cousin parchment was capable of being briefly fooled by a careful countercharm into a reading that was 3 days stale. Lestrange had cast the countercharm 3 days ago. On the morning he had stopped showing on it, and the parchment had been, for those 3 days, telling Harry that Lestrange was not there because, by its own confused metric, Lestrange had not been there. Lestrange had been, the whole time, in a small bed-and-breakfast above the bookstore, right next to the hardware store. Harry walked into town with his hands in his pockets and his coat collar turned up against the wet wind that had come up overnight. He was alone. He had told Carlyle on the phone that he was making a quick run to town. He had said he would be back in an hour. He had cast, leaving the cabin, a small notice-me-not, the kind he had stopped bothering with when the family was around and which he still liked on his ordinary errand-running mornings, because there was something in him that still preferred not to be looked at. He walked the half-mile to town at a quick, brisk pace and turned in at the hardware store and bought a length of rope and paid in cash and came out. He had a sandwich at the diner. He talked to Maddie about the weather. He bought a paper. He left. He came out of the diner onto Forks Avenue at 10:25. He was crossing the street to the alley behind the hardware store, where his coat with the rope in it was on the hook by the back door. He had hung it because the diner was too warm and he had not wanted to be in there with the rope coiled on his shoulder, when his small notice-me-not pulled lightly, in a way it had not pulled all morning. He stopped on the curb. He turned slowly with his hands in his pockets, in the casual way of a man who was looking up at the sky to see if it was about to rain. The street was empty. It was a Tuesday in October in a town of 3,000, 10:30 in the morning in the rain. The street was always empty. He extended his attention. He felt very faintly at the back of the alley behind the hardware store in the parking lot where the dumpster was, a small, deliberate, very still presence of a kind he had been waiting to feel for a fortnight. Lestrange. He did not turn. He did not run. He walked casually down the sidewalk, around the corner into the alley, with the small, calm steadiness of a man who was retrieving his coat. He did not draw his wand. He did not pull tight against the small pull at his collarbone that was, by now, the unmistakable cold settling in of his concentration. He drew in his head the shape of the alley. The alley was narrow. The alley was paved in cracked concrete. The alley had a dumpster at the south end, and a stack of pallets against the west wall, and a short flight of 3 concrete steps down to the back lot, which was a wider gravel space with the parked cars of 3 businesses and the fence of the lumber yard along its far side. He had been in and out of the alley 3 times in the last 2 weeks. He knew every angle of cover in it. He came into the alley. He paused at the back door of the hardware store as if to lift his coat off the hook. He laid his hand on the coat. He let himself feel the pull again. He felt it more clearly now. At the base of the steps, behind the corner of the dumpster, a presence of low intent Rabbastan Lestrange, with his wand drawn 3 feet from cover. He took the coat off the hook. He walked slowly down the 3 steps. He turned on the 2nd step and let his hand fall casually to the inside of his sleeve, and the wand came down into his palm in a small, unhurried motion, the way a wand comes down when its owner has spent 2 years loosening its housing for exactly that motion at exactly that speed. The first curse caught the air where his head had been. He had moved before the curse had been spoken. He had moved on the small flicker of malice at the edge of the alley which his hindbrain had read like text. The curse, green, fast, unmistakable, split the bricks above the back door of the hardware store and showered concrete down onto the steps where he had been standing. He came up on the gravel of the back lot with his wand already in motion. Rabbastan Lestrange was 40 feet away. He stood on the gravel in his gray coat with his short combed hair and his pale, long face and the particular small smile that he had worn into the alley, which was the smile of a man who had imagined this morning every night for a fortnight, and who was, in the moment, gratified that the imagination had been close. "Hello, Harry," he said. Harry did not answer. Harry, on a long inhale, slid sideways in 3 quick steps that took him out of the line of the dumpster and behind a parked Ford pickup, and his second response was already in the air before his shoulder had hit the side panel. Lestrange's shield held it. The fight after that was fast. Harry had not dueled in 2 years. He had not dueled in any serious way since the morning of the 2nd of May, and he had assumed every time he thought about it that he had let his form rust. He had not. The body of a young man whose cellular regeneration was self-sustaining and adapting did not, it turned out, let its form rust. He cast the way he had cast the morning Voldemort had fallen, with no incantations he had to think about, with no wasted motion, with a wand that knew his hand and a hand that knew the wand, and Lestrange, who had spent 22 years of Azkaban learning mostly how to keep himself alive in the inside of his own head, was, for the first time in the engagement, surprised. Lestrange had expected the boy. He had not expected the soldier. He recovered fast. He was good. He had, like Harry, not dueled in 2 years, but the Lestrange line had drilled their children in patient, one-on-one work since the 18th century, and the body remembered what the mind had been. He sent a fragmenting curse at the pickup that took the front quarter panel off, and the second curse that came on the heels of it shattered the windshield, and the third, fast, very fast, went into the gravel under Harry's left foot, and Harry rolled away through the spray of stone and came up under the rear bumper of the pickup with his wand already lifting. He did not curse Lestrange. He hexed the dumpster. The dumpster, old, heavy, on rusted wheels, slid sideways across the lot fast, and Lestrange had a second to register what was happening and another second to step back from it, and he stepped, and the dumpster went past, and the shield he had set up to deflect a curse he had been expecting did not deflect, of course, 2,000 pounds of solid metal. Half the dumpster caught him on the hip. The other half caught the corner of his coat. He spun. He went down on one knee. Harry was already moving. He came around the back of the pickup at a flat run. He hit Lestrange's shield with 3 curses, one to break it, one to hold, one to widen the gap, and Lestrange's shield flickered, held, and on the third curse split, and in the split-second window Harry sent a binding curse into Lestrange's right wrist that should, by the textbook, have wrapped the wrist in cold iron and pinned the wand to the gravel. The curse did not bind. Lestrange had wards on himself. The kind a Death Eater of his generation laid on himself in the morning. Harry had been counting in his head on the assumption that Lestrange had not had time in a small motel above the river to lay them. He had been wrong. The fight redoubled. Lestrange came up off one knee with a snarl, and the next sequence of curses he sent at Harry was the kind a Death Eater sent when he had stopped pretending he was here to take the boy alive. Harry felt the air of one of them go past his cheek, so close that the small hairs on the side of his face stood up. He cast back, and he cast back, and he cast back, and the small back lot behind the hardware store of Forks, Washington, lit up green and red and silver blue, in slow strobing flashes, in the unbothered gray October rain, and a red leaf drifted down from somewhere behind the lumberyard fence and lay in the gravel, and was, in the next second, scorched at the edges by a curse that had skimmed past it. Harry, on what he afterward thought was his 14th or 15th shield, took a curse on his off side that he had not, by half a second, deflected fully. It was a slicing curse. It went through his coat at the shoulder and through the shirt and through the skin of his upper arm in a clean straight line about 4 inches long, and the blood came up immediately through the cloth. He did not register the pain in the moment. He registered the fact of the cut. He registered with it that his arm was working at full strength regardless. He registered, without bothering to think about it, that the skin would start to knit before he was back in the cabin. He kept casting. Lestrange registered it too. Lestrange registered the cut. Lestrange registered Harry's failure to flinch at it. Lestrange registered in the next second what the parchment had been telling him about for 10 months, the boy's body, working in the ways the boy's body now worked. He had not, until that moment, fully believed it. He had taken it on the parchment's word. He had assembled the rest of his plan around it. He had, in the same moment, the small, ugly suspicion that the offer he had been about to make to the Volturi might, on inspection, have been a stronger offer than he had thought, and the second suspicion that he was, in the very next minute or two, possibly going to be killed in a back lot in a small American town by a boy he had been hunting for a year. He did not panic. He drew with his offhand the small, lead-lined ampule out of his breast pocket. He thumbed the seal. He threw it, hard, in a flat overarm at Harry's face. Harry shielded. The shield held the ampule. The ampule struck the shield about 3 inches in front of his face, and it did not break because the shield held, and the shield was Harry's strongest shield, and Lestrange had, in fact, miscalculated the durability of a Lestrange bottled poison against a Master of Death wand shield, and the ampule rebounded and rolled, intact, back across the gravel toward Lestrange's feet, and Lestrange in the same second turned his head sharply to look at it. Because the ampule had cost him 900 galleons, and he had spent 5 days getting it across the Atlantic, and he had not, until that second, considered the possibility that it was about to land on his own boots. The half-second turn of his head was the first concession Lestrange had made the whole fight. Alice came across the gravel from the south end of the alley. She came at the speed at which a vampire crosses 60 feet of gravel when she has decided the matter is serious, which is a speed that does not register in human eyes. She came in her yellow coat. She came in the soft canvas sneakers she had been wearing on the porch when the cup had dropped 3 days before. She came across the back lot in a single long stride that had, in it, none of the small, wasted motion of any movement Harry had ever made in his life. She came up on Lestrange from the side. Lestrange had time in his half-second of distraction to register in the very corner of his eye a yellow shape moving on him at impossible speed. He did not have time to turn. He did not have time to lift his wand. He had time only to begin to register the existence of the threat, and the registration began and was not yet completed when the small cold hand came down, with the precision of a surgeon and the strength of a hydraulic press, on his right wrist. She broke the wrist. She broke it at the joint. She broke it in the manner of a person who had decided not to break the man yet, but to take from him, immediately, the only weapon that mattered. The wand came out of his hand. The hand came out of his sleeve. Lestrange screamed, a small clipped scream, the kind a man with 2 decades of Azkaban training screamed when the pain registered through his discipline, and Alice took the wand in her left hand and held it lightly the way she would hold a pencil, and held him in her right by the upper arm above the broken wrist. She did not look at Harry. "Yours," she said, evenly. Harry came across the gravel. He came at a walk. He kept his wand up. He stopped in front of Lestrange, at a distance of 3 feet. He looked at the man, who was on his knees on the gravel because Alice had been pressing him down into it gently, and who was breathing in the careful, shallow way of a man with a broken wrist trying not to faint, and whose face, Harry now saw, had the long, pale bones of the Lestrange line that he had seen before only on the woman who had killed Sirius. He stood there a long moment. "Rabbastan," he said. "Potter. You killed Frank Holloway." "I killed an old farmer in a kitchen who let me in because I wanted to remind you that I could." "Yes, yes. Why? You killed my brother. Your friends killed my brother. You killed my Bella. You took everything from me, Potter. I have been in Azkaban for 22 years thinking about the day I would. I know." "You have no idea what." "I know exactly what," Harry said gently. "I have spent my whole life knowing exactly what. You are not telling me anything I have not heard, from your sister-in-law, from your nephew, from the man who set you all on me in the first place. You will not today tell me anything that I will find new. I want to know one thing. I want to know where you sent the letter." Lestrange closed his eyes. "I do not know," he said, "what you mean." "You do." "I do not." Harry tilted his head. "You sent 2, he said. "I have been thinking about it. I would have sent 2 in your place. The first when you arrived, the second when you were sure. You sent one to Arrow. Who did you send the second to?" Lestrange did not answer. Harry looked at him a long moment. "All right," Harry said quietly. "All right. It does not matter in the immediate. We will find out." He raised the wand. He did not say anything. He did not need an incantation. He had not used an incantation on a curse this serious in a year and a half, and he did not use one now. He had the wand in one hand and the small, still focused interior of his attention on Lestrange's eyes, and Lestrange's eyes, in the last second, were not afraid. They were tired. Rabbastan Lestrange had been tired for a long time, and it surprised Harry, with the small, quiet shock he had not expected, that the man's last expression was the expression of a tired person. Lestrange smiled. "They are coming," he said. "I know. They will come faster now. I sent them the second letter on Friday. They will be here within the week. They know you are here. They know about her. They know, yes. You cannot, in fact, do anything about that. Number, you will lose her, Potter. Number, you will lose all of them, and you will know, in the long, quiet years afterward, that you brought it on them. Goodbye, Rabbastan." The curse did not need a name. It was the curse a wizard cast when he had decided that a thing should end. And it was the curse Harry had cast, perhaps 3 times in his life, and he cast it now, and Rabbastan Lestrange, in the second after, sagged forward in Alice's grip and did not move again. Alice released his arm. He fell, sideways, onto the gravel of the back lot beside the dumpster, and lay as if he were sleeping, with his short, combed hair only a little disturbed by the fall. Alice stepped back. She had the wand in her hand. She held it out. Harry took it. He looked at it briefly, the long, pale wood of it, the dark stain at the grip from 1,000 uses he did not need to know about. He turned it in his palm. He set it on a flat piece of gravel on the ground. "Step back," he said. She stepped back. He pointed his own wand at the Lestrange wand. He said very softly, "Franger." The wand splintered. It splintered in three. The core, a long thin filament of dragon heartstring, the same kind that had been in his Aunt Bellatrix's wand, the same kind he had broken in his own hands once before, coiled as it released into the gravel and was still. He picked up the three pieces. He put them in his coat pocket. He looked at Lestrange's body. He looked at it for, he later thought, perhaps 30 seconds. He thought of his godfather. He thought of the dais in the Department of Mysteries. He thought of the laugh Lestrange's sister-in-law had laughed when Sirius had gone through. He thought of his mother's portrait and his father's portrait and the small curl of Tonks's hair Andromeda had given him and the small careful plaque on the lupin grave. He thought of all of it, and he let it all come up at once, and he held it up under the rain for a careful count, and then he let it go. "That is the last of them," he said quietly to nobody. "That is the last." Alice was at his shoulder. He turned his face. She was looking up at him. Her hand, gentle, came up and pressed flat against the cut at his shoulder, where the slicing curse had gone through. The cut had begun already to knit. By the time her hand was on it, the bleeding had stopped. By the time he was thinking about it, the skin had closed. She did not say anything. He did not say anything. After a while, she dropped her hand. He took her hand. He laced his fingers through hers in the same small, careful way she had laced hers through his 4 nights ago on the porch. They stood holding hands in the back lot of the hardware store of Forks, Washington, with the body of a Death Eater on the gravel beside the dumpster in the soft, constant rain, and Alice, after a long moment, said in her bright, careful voice, "Carlyle is coming." "How long?" 8 minutes. "All right." It's called Edward and Jasper. "All right." "They will help you they will help you, they will help us with the body." "All right." "Harry." "Yes." "You are all right." He looked down at her. He nodded slowly. He did not let go of her hand. "I am all right," he said. I am all right, Alice. I am very tired. I am all right." "All right." She squeezed lightly. He squeezed back. "Carlyle came in 8 minutes. Edward and Jasper came in 9. Carlyle did not say anything when he arrived. He simply put a hand, briefly, on Harry's good shoulder and looked at him. And then he walked over to Lestrange's body, and with the brisk, practiced detachment of a doctor who had been a doctor for 3 centuries, examined it. He pronounced it, in a low voice, dead. He produced from his car a folded waterproof tarp and a length of rope and a small bottle of bleach, in the manner of a man who had evidently prepared for the eventuality. He and Edward and Jasper, between them in the next 20 minutes, had the body wrapped, the gravel washed, the dumpster wheeled back into approximate position, and the back lot of the hardware store returned, more or less, to the look of an undisturbed Tuesday morning behind a small American hardware store. Nobody had come into the alley while the fight had been happening. Nobody, from the diner or the bookstore or the hardware store itself, had come out the back door. Harry had not at first understood why. He had thought, walking back up the alley, that he would have to obviate 3 or 4 witnesses and explain himself to Charlie Swan. It was Edward who understood first. "Alice," Edward said gently, walking past her, "what did you do?" "I asked them not to look." "You what?" "I came down Forks Avenue 2 minutes before he attacked. I asked the people I passed not to look at the alley for the next hour. They are not looking. They will not." Edward did not say anything for a long time. Then he said very softly, "Alice, your gift has, I know. You did that without, I know, Edward. Harry told me last week that I was a witch before I was what I am. I have been learning fast. Do not be alarmed." "I am not alarmed." "Are you not?" I am not." He looked at her another long moment. Then he leaned briefly sideways and pressed his temple with a small, faintly amused affection against the top of her hair. "All right," he said. "Tell us when there is more, please, so we can keep up." "All right." That night the family met again in the long room with the glass wall. Harry told them about the second letter. He told them plainly that Lestrange had sent it on Friday. He told them what the parchment told him about the Volturi. Carlyle, who had been working through the math in his head all afternoon, said very quietly, "Then they are in Seattle tonight." "Yes, and they will be here tomorrow evening, the day after at the latest." "Yes." "All right." Rosalie, in the chair by the fire with her arms folded for the first time in days in the bored manner of a woman who was not folding her arms in fear, smiled. "Then let us," she said, "be ready." Chapter 8 and Chapter 9. The Volturi moved. They walked down out of the trees at dusk on Wednesday. There were 4 of them. Demetri came first, in a long gray coat with the collar turned up, with the soft, considered tread of a man who had spent 6 centuries learning to enter rooms without disturbing them. Jane came on his left, half a step behind. 2 of the regular guard, in the wide black cloaks they wore in the field, came on Demetri's right and behind, in formation. They had come on foot from the road. They had abandoned the car, at Arrow's instruction, 2 miles south, because Arrow had judged it dignified for the messengers of Volturi to arrive at the home of the Cullen family on their own feet. Carlyle was on the porch. He had been on the porch since 6. He had on his soft gray wool sweater. He had his hands clasped behind his back. He stood at the top of the steps with the lantern lit beside him, the way the master of an old house stood at his door for a visit he had agreed to receive but had not exactly looked forward to. "Demetri," he said, when the 4 of them were 10 feet from the lawn. "Carlyle, welcome. Thank you. You will, of course, come inside." "Of course." The 4 of them came up the porch steps. Carlyle did not move out of the doorway. He held his ground in the way the host of a house where invited guests have come held it, and the 4 of them came past him, in single file, and stepped into the long room with the great glass wall. The family was arranged in the room. Esme was in the chair by the fire. Edward was at the piano bench. Emmett and Jasper stood, on either side of the bay window, in the loose pose of 2 men who were not posing. Rosalie was in the armchair across from Esme, with her chin lifted at exactly the angle of a queen's chin in a portrait. Charlotte stood in the corner by the bookcase, with her hands folded. Alice was on the rug. Harry was beside her. He stood, not in front of the family, not behind, beside the family, which was the position he and Carlyle had agreed on that morning. He wore black trousers and a black shirt, both of which Alice had bought for him in Port Angels 2 days before with her unerring instinct for what one ought to wear to occasions of significance. His wand was in his sleeve. His cloak, which he had not put on but had brought, folded down to a handkerchief in his trouser pocket, was where he could reach for it. The stone on the chain was warm against his sternum. He had let himself that morning feel its small, low pulse for the first time in a year. He had not turned the stone. He did not need to. He had spent in the 2 years since the war every free reflex he had on not turning it. He was choosing tonight not to. He had also chosen that morning to receive the 4 arriving guests in the human way they would expect. He had eaten a real breakfast. He had eaten lunch. He had a small smear of something that looked like coffee on the cuff of his shirt, which was deliberate, because Alice had told him, with the small bright efficiency she had developed for the planning of this evening, that vampires of Arrow's training read everything, and that an everyday smear of coffee on a cuff would, if calibrated correctly, communicate to Demetri before the introductions had even begun that Harry was a man who lived a life rather than a man who staged one. He had laughed when she had told him. He was, in any case, taking her advice. Demetri came into the long room with the small, steady eyes of a man who had been in 1,000 long rooms and had not yet become bored of them. He inclined his head to Esme. He inclined his head to Carlyle, who had followed him in. He inclined his head to Edward and Rosalie and Emmett and Jasper and Charlotte in a single small considered motion that distributed equal courtesy to each of them. He paused at Alice. "My dear," he said, "Demetri, you are well." "I am very well." "I am pleased to hear it." He turned then to Harry. He looked at him a long moment. Demetri's face had the distinctive narrow elegance of a Greek bust, and it was, just now, neutral. He was reading what he could read, and he was doing it with the efficiency of a long professional in a room full of long professionals. Harry, who had watched Snape for 6 years, watched him back without flinching. "Mr. Black, Mr. Demetri, my master sends his greetings. Please thank him. My master invites you, Mr. Black, to Volturi, to meet him in person. He uses the word to converse." "How kind of him. My master is, by all accounts, the world's last great authority on gifts of unusual rarity. He has examined gifts in their many forms for 2,000 years. He hopes that in a brief visit he will have the privilege of examining yours and of, if you are willing, sharing his own observations of others." "Mr. Demetri." "Yes. Will you take a seat, please?" Demetri inclined his head. He did not, in fact, take a seat. None of the four of them did. Demetri stood instead in the careful, courteous posture of a man who had stood in 1,000 rooms without sitting in them. Jane stood at his left. The 2 guards stood at his right. Harry, after the small, unconcerned acknowledgment of the etiquette that was being declined, stayed standing himself. So did Alice, beside him. So did Carlyle, who had moved quietly into the room behind Demetri and had taken a position at the door, not blocking it, but in it, which Demetri, of course, had registered. "Mr. Demetri," Harry said gently. "Yes. I will not be coming to Volturi." A small pause. "Mr. Black." "Yes. My master will be saddened." "I am sorry to hear that. Please convey from me that the saddening was not intended. Convey also that the answer is final. I will not be coming to Volturi. I will not be examined. I will not be, what I am will not be measured by anyone else. That is how it must be." Jane, at Demetri's left, spoke for the first time. "Mr. Black," she said in her small, clear voice, "perhaps you do not understand what is being asked of you. I do. You do not. My master is offering you the courtesy of an invitation. The courtesy is generous. The courtesy is unprecedented. People with your kind of gift do not generally receive courtesy. They are, as a rule, taken." "Yes. Then perhaps you will reconsider." She looked at him. She had a face. Harry had been told to expect it. He was struck, regardless, by how young the face actually looked. She had been turned very small. She did not look, on first glance, like the most lethal thing in 100 miles. She looked like an 8-year-old in a long black cloak. Her eyes were, however, not a child's eyes. Her eyes had something in them that Harry had seen in his life exactly twice, in Bellatrix Lestrange, and in the man Bellatrix Lestrange had served. She had lifted them now on him, with the small, steady focus a person used who was prepared to inflict, at distance, a great deal of pain on him in order to make him reasonable. He felt her power. He felt it as a small, clean, focused weight that came up, around him from the floor, and tried to settle on his shoulders. He felt it for, perhaps, half a second. It rolled off him the way water rolled off a polished stone. He did not particularly do anything about it. He merely stood and looked at her and let it happen, and at the end of the half-second the weight had unmade itself, and Jane's small face, which had not by any visible flicker changed, was nonetheless, in the next second, the face of a person who had just, for the first time in 140 years, met a person on whom her gift did not work. Edward, on the piano bench, watched her with his head tilted half an inch. Carlyle in the doorway did not move. Harry tilted his head a fraction. "Miss Jane, yes. I will say it once, with great respect, with as much courtesy as I can manage. That trick works on people who can be made smaller. I have already been smaller than I can be made. I have lost everything that mattered to me. I have outlived people who should have outlived me. I have spent my entire life being told what I have to do by people who were certain they understood my body, my mind, and my future. There is, in me, no leverage left for your gift. There is no place in me for it to settle. You will not make me uncomfortable. You will not make me afraid. You will, however, make this conversation considerably more difficult if you continue, because Carlyle and Mr. Demetri and I were all, until you tried it, having a perfectly reasonable conversation, and you have chosen in front of all of us to escalate it. I am asking you with respect to stop." The room held still. Jane did not look away from him. Jane's small white face did not move. Demetri, beside her, very gently in a voice almost too soft for the room, said, "Jane." She did not move. "Jane, he is correct. We were having a conversation. Carlyle, I beg your pardon. Mr. Black, I beg your pardon. Jane is at times enthusiastic. Arrow has said, Jane said, evenly, without taking her eyes from Harry, that I should demonstrate at my discretion if it would assist the conversation. I do not believe that he intended that you demonstrate to a man who is, evidently, the only living person in the world on whom your gift does not work, at the very moment when the family hosting us has elected to receive us civilly. Jane, sister, he is correct. Step back." She held still a moment longer. She stepped back. Demetri lifted his eyes again to Harry. There was in them, just for a flicker, a small, grim, amused respect. Demetri was old. Demetri was older than he looked. Demetri had been carried, 600 years ago, into the Volturi guard from a small village in the Peloponnese, and he had spent 600 years understanding what would and would not survive in the company of the kings. And he had, in those 600 years, watched Jane do the thing she had just done to 1,700 people of various species and various dignities. And he had not, in those 600 years, watched her fail. He inclined his head to Harry very slightly in the small private acknowledgement of a man who had just been treated, by a stranger, to something he had not seen before. "Mr. Black, yes. I will not pretend the situation is simple. My master has hopes for a relationship with you. My master has been very specific about those hopes. I will, of course, convey your decision. The conveying will not be easy. He will be, as Jane has said, generous in his feelings, and I will, of course, convey those feelings as well. There will be perhaps a request that you reconsider. There may be a second request. I am, as you understand, a messenger. I will not in this evening press on a matter that you have made plain. I do, however, ask, what shall I tell my master when he asks me how to proceed?" Harry took a breath. He had at this point been thinking for 2 days about exactly this question. He had thought about it with Carlyle until late on Tuesday night, and he had thought about it with Alice from late Tuesday night until early Wednesday morning, and he had thought about it, walking the wet woods alone, all morning Wednesday, and he had assembled in his head a small careful plan that did not, on inspection, look like a plan, but that depended on the fact that Arrow was not, fundamentally, a man who wanted to take. Arrow was a man who wanted to know. Arrow had been, by all accounts, the world's most patient collector of knowledge for 2,000 years, and a collector, if approached correctly, could be steered. He took a small step forward. He addressed Demetri directly. "Demetri, yes, tell your master this. Yes, tell him that I will not come to Volterra. Tell him that I will not allow myself to be examined. Tell him that I will not make a gift of my person, my body, or my time. Tell him that on these points the answer is final and that there is in me no room for him to negotiate." He paused. "Tell him, however," he went on, "that I am willing, if he will receive it, to engage in a correspondence." Demetri's eyebrows lifted very slightly. "Tell him that I will write to him. Tell him that I will answer his questions about wandwork, about the magical world I come from, about its history and its institutions, in measure to be calibrated by my own discretion. Tell him that he will write to me, in turn, what he has seen of his own kind in the long years of his life, and of others' kinds in measure to be calibrated by his discretion. Tell him that the correspondence will be private. Tell him that the correspondence will be on neutral ground, by which I mean by post, not by emissary. Tell him that the correspondence will continue as long as it is interesting to both of us, and that it will end on either of our discretion. Tell him that I do not in this offer owe him my body or my person, and that the offer is for words only between two people who have, perhaps, much to teach each other." He waited. Demetri's mouth had moved very faintly at the corner. "Mr. Black, yes, that is an interesting offer. Will he accept it?" "Mr. Black, I have served my master for 600 years. I do not as a rule predict him. I will say that he has a particular love for the word correspondence. He has read in his life most of the great correspondences. He owns the Pliny letters. He owns Madame de Sévigné. He owns the letters of Voltaire. He owns, in the inner library, a set of what we believe to be authentic letters from Mary Stuart to her cousin in their original red ink. He will, I think, be intrigued. I cannot speak for him. I will, however, convey it." "Thank you. You will, of course, give us the address." "I will give it to Carlyle. Carlyle will send it to your master in his next letter in the ordinary post, in the way Carlyle has communicated with him for 100 years. I will not, Mr. Demetri, give it directly to you tonight." Demetri's small smile widened very slightly. "You are careful, Mr. Black." "I am. That is wise." Demetri turned his head. He looked at Carlyle. "Carlyle, yes. You will write to him." "I will. Tomorrow. Thank you." He looked back at Harry. He looked at him a long moment. "Mr. Black, yes. There is one further thing. You asked at the beginning of this evening what we were here for. You did not ask, however, who else may be." Harry at that went very still. "Mr. Demetri." "Yes. I had, in fact, intended to ask. I was waiting for the right point in the conversation. I will save us both the trouble. There is a man from Britain who wrote to my master a fortnight ago. The man is dead this morning in a small mortuary cabinet in Port Angels, where Carlyle and your friends placed him at considerable cost to the local sheriff's deputy who would otherwise have been the one to file the paperwork. Yes, I know about the man. My master has for 2 weeks known about the man. The man's name was Lestrange. He sent a second letter on Friday which my master received, and which my master, for what it is worth, found amusing. The man offered to deliver you to my master in exchange for our help in killing you. My master responded by the same delivery that we were not in the habit of taking commissions, and that the man should consider the absence of a reply on this matter to be itself the reply. Lestrange, I take it, did not take the absence well. My master will not weep for him." A long pause. "My master is not, Mr. Black, a man who breaks the small understandings of the world in pursuit of objects he wishes to acquire. He is a man who waits. He is, in the larger sense, patient. He will, I think, be pleased that the wizard who hunted you has been removed from the equation by your own hand. He will note it. The note will be private. I tell you all of this because it is the last courtesy I have been authorized to extend tonight. Thank you, Mr. Demetri." "You are welcome, Mr. Black." Demetri turned to Carlyle. "We will go now. We will return south. We will tell my master what you have told us. We will, I trust, not speak again for some time." "I trust the same. Good evening, Esme. Good evening, Demetri. Good evening, Cullens." There was a chorus of polite small nods around the room. Demetri turned. He went to the door. The 2 guards turned with him. Jane did not move. "Jane," Demetri said. She did not move. "Jane, we are leaving." She looked still at Harry. "Mr. Black." "Miss Jane, we will see each other again." "Miss Jane, I have just this evening learned that your future is, in part, in the hands of a friend of mine who can see it. I trust her judgment on the question of whether we will. Forgive me for, in this matter, deferring to her." Alice, beside him, said very lightly, "You will not, Jane, not for many, many years. And when you do, it will not be, I think, in the form you presently imagine." Jane's pale face did not move. She turned on her heel, sharp, and crossed the long room behind Demetri and the guards, and she did not look back. The 4 of them went down the porch steps and across the lawn and into the trees, and the small, cool wake of their movement was, in the room, replaced very slowly by the soft, constant background of the rain. Nobody, for a long minute, said anything. Harry, after a while, sat down on the rug beside the chair where Esme was. He did not exactly mean to sit down. His knees, in the moment after Demetri's group went into the trees, decided for him. He sat. He laid his head briefly against the side of the chair where Esme's hand was. Esme's small, cool hand came down gently on his hair and stayed there. Carlyle came in from the doorway. He sat down on the rug beside him. Harry. Yes. That was extremely well done. Carlyle. Yes. Will he write? He will. Will it work? It will work, Harry, for as long as it is interesting to him. Arrow's interests have lasted, by my observation, in cycles of several decades. We will have, I think, several decades of peace from this evening's conversation. After that we will see. All right. All right. He sat in the quiet a long moment. He looked then around the room. He looked at each of them. He looked at Edward, who was still on the piano bench. He looked at Emmett, who had relaxed, very slightly, from the position he had held by the bay window. He looked at Rosalie, whose arms were unfolded for the first time in 3 days, and who was looking at Harry with an expression that he had not seen on her face before. The expression, he thought afterward, of a person who had decided in the course of an evening that the small new occupant of her family was, in fact, of her family. He looked at Esme, whose hand was still in his hair. He looked at Carlyle beside him on the rug. He looked at Charlotte and Jasper in the corner with their hands now joined. He looked at last at Alice. Alice was on the rug too. She had sat down beside him some time in the last minute when he had not been paying attention. Her hand was on his knee. Her face in the lamplight was the very still, bright face of a woman who had been holding her attention for 2 hours on the small, precise question of whether a half-dozen possible futures would resolve into the one the family wanted, and which had evidently resolved. She looked up at him. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. He took her hand off his knee. He laced his fingers through hers. He pressed the back of her hand briefly against his mouth. She did not say anything. He did not say anything. Esme did not say anything. Carlyle did not say anything. The rain, outside the long glass wall, fell. Carlyle wrote his letter the next morning. He wrote it in his careful hand, in black ink on a single sheet of unlined paper. He gave it by Harry an address. He gave it on Harry's instruction, the small ceremonial postage of a letter sent in good faith to a very old friend who had, in the long years of their acquaintance, been occasionally frightening, and who had nonetheless, in the long quiet wait of those years, become a person Carlyle considered in his own way to know. He sealed it. He sent it. The letter arrived in Volturi on a Wednesday, 10 days later. Arrow read it 3 times. He laughed very softly, the way he had laughed when he had read the first letter from Lestrange. He picked up his pen. He began to write. Chapter 9. In Chapter 10. A forked spring Andromeda came in March. She came on a Thursday afternoon by international portkey to a small registered arrival point in Seattle, and Harry met her there with a rented car and Teddy strapped, after considerable grandmotherly negotiation, into a child seat that Harry had spent the morning installing with a wand and a great deal of patience in equal proportion. Andromeda was thinner than the last time he had seen her, in a way that made him grip the wheel a little harder on the drive north. She was also, he registered with a small relief, smiling. She had been, in the months since he had left, gradually emerging from the long gray condition of a woman who had outlived her sister, her husband, her son-in-law, her daughter, and the small, quiet life she had been promised. She had her grandson. She had Hermione, who she had taken to having tea with every Thursday. She had the small, careful house in the village where she had moved a year ago, which had a garden she could tend, and which had a low gate Teddy had begun, as of the previous month, to climb over. She had Harry's letters. Harry had kept his promise to Hermione and had, in turn, written Andromeda every month, and she had written back, and he had begun in the careful way of a man who had been 13 kinds of orphan, to understand in the months since arriving in Forks that some kinds of family were not lost permanently. They were simply paused. Teddy in the back seat had been a complicated negotiation. Teddy had not stopped talking for the entire Portkey arrival, the entire walk to the car, and the first half of the drive. He told Harry in considerable detail about a frog. He told him in less considerable detail about a song. He told him with great seriousness that he had lost a tooth, and that the tooth had been put under a pillow, and that the tooth had been replaced in the morning by a galleon which was, Teddy felt, possibly an error on the part of whatever entity was managing the transaction, since galleons were known to be excessive. Harry, driving, agreed that galleons were probably excessive and undertook to investigate the matter on Teddy's behalf. Teddy approved this. Andromeda, in the passenger seat, watched her grandson and her godson in the rear view together, with the particular wet small smile of a woman who had not, 6 months ago, expected to see this combination ever again. The cabin was full when they arrived. Esme had that morning simply migrated half of her kitchen down to the cabin. It had not been discussed. Harry had come back from a walk to find her already at the stove, and Carlyle in the porch chair with a book, and Alice on the rug with a sketchbook, and Edward, of all people, at the door with a small careful arrangement of yellow tulips, the kind a man buys when a small boy is coming, and the man is, in fact, quite shy about small boys. Rosalie and Emmett were not present. Rosalie had said, the previous evening, with the fierce, blunt honesty she had developed in the last 6 months, that she did not, at present, trust herself to be the right kind of careful around a small Lupin descendant of the Black family for the first afternoon. Emmett had said he would stay with her. They would, the next day, be over and would bring, Emmett had assured Harry, the loudest possible toys. Andromeda came into the cabin and stood for a moment in the door. She had been told, Harry had told her, in the careful long letter he had written in February, what the Cullens were. She had written back in her dry, careful way that she was a Black by birth and a Tonks by marriage and a Lupin by bereavement, and that she had, in her life, kept company with worse than vampires, that she was perfectly happy to meet the people who had been kind to her godson, and that she would, if it would not embarrass anyone, like to be seated with her back to the door at any meal, because the Black family habit of preferring to keep an eye on the door was, in a house of vampires, possibly an unnecessary courtesy that, on principle, she nonetheless intended to extend. She came into the cabin. Esme came across the room with both hands out, and Andromeda took them, and the two women looked at each other a long moment, and Esme said very quietly, "You are very welcome here, Mrs. Tonks." Andromeda, Esme, I see you have made my godson eat. Thank you. He had been losing his color before he left. He will not in this house lose his color again. I gathered. She let go of Esme's hands. She turned her head. She found on the rug the small bright face of a woman in a yellow cardigan and dark trousers and the soft canvas sneakers that had become, somehow in the previous winter, the woman's wardrobe of choice. "You are Alice," Andromeda said. "I am. Harry has written about you." He has, Andromeda said with a small, dry, amused glance at Harry, "written about you, in the proportion of a man who is writing about somebody he is taking great pains not to write too much about." Alice's small face moved very faintly at the corner. Harry, by the door, turned very deliberately his back and concentrated on hanging Teddy's small coat on the lower of 2 pegs. "It is good of you to come, Mrs. Tonks," Alice said. Andromeda, it is good of you to receive me. It is good of you, more particularly, to receive my grandson, who you do not yet know and who is, by reputation, on his 4th box of biscuits today." Teddy, who was in the room by then, looked up sharply at the word biscuit and made his small, expressive face. Esme laughed. She laughed in the small, unself-conscious way she had been laughing more often in the last months, and she crouched down to Teddy's eye level and she said, "I have, as it happens, just made a tray of shortbread. They are not for biscuits-only consumption. They are for boys with good manners consumption. May I see your manners?" Teddy, with the prim, correct dignity of a 3.5-year-old who had been asked to perform, presented his manners. The afternoon after that unfolded the way a careful afternoon among careful people sometimes unfolds when a small boy is in the middle of it. Teddy, who had been at first somewhat shy of Edward, was, by the second hour, climbing onto Edward's knees and demanding that Edward play, on the cabin's small old upright that Carlyle had, on a whim, had moved down from the hospital staff lounge 2 months earlier, the song from the morning. Edward, who had been 100 years a man and had not, in those 100 years, been climbed on by a small boy with the abandoned trust of a child who had been told, by his godfather, that this man was safe, played the song from the morning. The song from the morning was a song Teddy had, in fact, made up that morning, which had, at most, 3 notes and 1 repeated word. Edward, with the seriousness of a virtuoso who had been honored by a request, played it. He played a variation on it. He played an embellishment of the variation. Teddy, by the second variation, was laughing in the small, high, helpless laugh of a child who had discovered that the world's serious people were, in fact, willing to be ridiculous for him. Andromeda watched her grandson on Edward Cullen's lap, and her face did, very briefly, the small wet thing it had been doing more often in the last 6 months, and she turned her face away. And Esme, who knew in the way Esme knew everything, handed her, without a word, a small clean cloth napkin from the table and said in the same small, unobtrusive voice, "He is precisely like his mother, Andromeda. I have, of course, not met her. I can tell." "Yes," Andromeda said into the napkin. "Yes, he is. Later, when the boy had, despite considerable resistance, fallen asleep on the rug with his head on Atlas's folded wing, Atlas, in a small, unprecedented turn of his own personality, had decided that an exhausted 3.5-year-old was the kind of project he was, on this particular afternoon, willing to host on his back. Alice, with a small nod to Harry, took her coat from the peg, and Harry took his, and the 2 of them slipped out of the cabin, quietly by the back door, and walked down through the wet ferns to the creek, and along the creek bed for 1/4 of a mile, and up the small ridge, and out, by the long, low slope of the bluff, onto the cliffs above La Push. The wind that afternoon was off the water. They stood at the cliff edge. Harry's hands were in his pockets. Alice's hands, after a moment, were not in hers. She had her hand at his elbow in the way that had become a habit. The hood of his coat was up against the wet wind. Hers was not. Her short black hair was wild in the wind. She did not seem to mind. They watched the surf for a long time. "Harry, yes, you are smiling." "I am. You have been smiling more in the last weeks." "Yes. I noticed. I assumed. I have been keeping a small private record. That is alarming. It is for my own use. I will not show it to you. Mercy, mercy." She said the word with the small, bright, affectionate humor she had developed for a particular sort of conversation between them. He stood at the cliff edge with the wind on his face, and he let the smile widen. He had not smiled like this in 2 years. He had, perhaps, never smiled like this. He had been a child who had not had much opportunity for the kind of smile that was a small private joy under a wet sky in a country he had decided to live in. He had it now. He let himself notice he had it. "Alice, yes, I had the entire wizarding world. I left it. I did not know what I was looking for. I know. I did not know I was until I was here, until Alice. I did not know the small, quiet life I had been promised was a thing that was actually possible. I had, all my life, been led to expect that it was a story other people had. I had the polite assurance of every adult I knew that I would be very happy when the dust settled. The dust settled. I was not very happy. I was, in fact, almost as miserable as I had been the week before the dust settled, which is to say only a little less miserable than I had been the week before that. I thought I had begun to think, Alice. I had begun to think that whatever was wrong with me was permanent, that I had in the war broken some small, ordinary thing in myself that the rest of the wizarding world had been allowed to keep. I had begun to think the war had taken from me the thing I had not used yet. She did not interrupt him. I came here, he went on, to be quiet for a while, to be invisible, to stop. I did not come here looking for a person. I did not come here looking for a family. I did not come here looking for a porch with a lantern on it and an old woman who would feed me bread and a brother who could not read my mind and a sister who could not hurt me and a woman with a pastry box who would walk through my notice me, not as if I were not hiding. Harry. Yes. I think you are allowed to know now. He looked, for the first time since they had stopped at the cliff edge, at her. She was very small in the wet wind. She was, in her plain sneakers and her dark trousers and her cardigan and her wind-wild hair, the most ordinary woman in the world for that moment, which was the kind of ordinary that took 100 years to learn how to be. Her face, looking up at him, was the still bright, attentive face that had been since the first morning her face. It had not changed in 6 months. It did not need to. It was, to him in that moment, a face he had decided he intended to keep looking at for a long time. He did not that afternoon kiss her. He had thought, walking out on the path, that he might. He had thought the night before that he would. He had, in fact, all the way down through the ferns and along the creek and up the ridge, been carrying in his chest the small, quiet certainty that the moment was coming. He had been wrong only in the form of it. He did not kiss her. He turned instead on the path and faced her square. He took her hand in his right hand. He took her other hand in his left. He held them. He looked at her. Alice. Yes. I am going to be the kind of patient with this that you have been with everything. I have in the last 6 months learned the way you do things. I have learned that you do not ever rush. I have learned that you wait. I have learned that you let the small bright shape of the thing you are seeing arrive, and that you do not insist ever on bringing it into the present before it is ready. I have learned this from you. I would like to do this thing between us, the same way. Yes. I would like us, Alice, to be for a while slow. Yes. I would like us to sit on porches. I would like us to go to Port Angels together for croissants. I would like us to walk these cliffs every Sunday and not, for some Sundays, say very much. I would like us to learn each other for a year or 2 or however many it takes. I have, as you know, time. Yes. And then when we know. Yes. Then we will know. She looked up at him. The wet wind picked at her hair. She did not smile. She did, in her own small, careful way, something better. She lifted her face once and pressed her forehead lightly against his chin, and she stood there a long moment with her small, cold forehead against his jaw, and he could feel her not breathing, the way you feel a held thing, and after a while she breathed, a small, careful, unnecessary breath against his throat, and she stepped back half a step and she said, all right, Harry, all right. He did not let go of her hands. She did not let go of his. The surf, 300 feet below the cliff edge, came in and went out and came in and went out. A year later, on the porch of the White House with the great glass wall, on a Saturday in May, the family was arrayed across the wide front steps, and the long bench and the 2 armchairs in the loose configuration of a Saturday afternoon that nobody had organized. Esme was clipping the heads off old roses. Carlyle was reading a journal. Edward was, on the porch swing, half playing a small idle melody on a guitar he had taken up in March on a particular whim that had survived. Emmett was rebuilding the back of a clock he had taken apart on Tuesday and not yet put back together. Rosalie, beside Emmett, was reading. Jasper and Charlotte were not in residence. They were in Texas for the month, but Alice had, in her usual way, said the previous afternoon that they would arrive on the next Sunday in time for breakfast, and the kitchen had already begun to organize itself, in Esme's absent-handed way, around their arrival. Harry was on the bench with a letter on his knee. He was reading it for the third time. The letter was from Hermione. The letter was, in the way of Hermione's letters, mostly 5 separate letters folded into one, on the various topics she had been thinking about. She had, in the first paragraph, told him about Ron, and in the second about Teddy, and in the third about the hearing she had attended in Wisengamot 2 days ago, at which she had, with the patient persistence Harry had learned to expect, finally got the bill she had been pushing for through committee. She had told him in the 4th paragraph about a research project she had begun in February, in which she had been, with the help of 3 colleagues, mapping the small, careful overlap between vampire foresight and wizard divination. Research she had, with her usual courtesy, shared in advance with the Volturi Correspondence Committee, of which Harry was, on paper, the founding member, and which had so far consisted in practice of Harry, a fortnightly letter from Arrow, and Carlyle's mild editorial supervision. She had told him in the 5th and last paragraph that she had bought a flight in June. She was coming for 2 weeks. She wanted him to know she was bringing 2 suitcases of British biscuits and a copy of a book on early 20th century Muggle history that Carlyle had asked her to find. She was, also, looking forward to meeting Alice finally in person. He folded the letter. He set it on his knee. He looked up. Alice was at his shoulder. She had, in the last quarter of an hour, drifted onto the bench beside him, in the way she had a habit of drifting, and was sketching, on the small open pad of paper on her knee, the shape of a hummingbird that had come to the porch feeder 20 minutes earlier and had stayed, for reasons of its own, all morning. Edward, on the porch swing, looked up from his guitar. He had a small wry smile at one corner of his mouth. Harry, yes, I have, given up. Have you? I have. On you, your mind, the reading of it. I have in the past year made approximately 400 attempts to find a way in. I have tried in turn, distance, focus, surprise, distraction, the approach of a phrase he is about to think, and the approach of a phrase I would like him to think. None of them has worked. It is, just to say, the longest sustained silence I have ever had in this family, which has become, in the last year, the closest thing in this house to peace. You are, let me make sure I have the implication. You are saying that my company is restful because I am the only person in your life on whom your gift does not work. That is what I am saying. That is what I gathered. I find I prefer it. That is what you said the first night in your father's house. It was true then, and it is true now, and it is true now. Harry looked for a long, careful moment at Edward. Edward looked for a long, careful moment at him. The smile on Edward's mouth widened very slightly. The smile on Harry's mouth widened very slightly. They did not, either of them, say anything further. The porch swing creaked, very softly, in the way it had been creaking on Saturdays for 9 years. Atlas, in the rafters of the porch, opened one round eye, considered the gathering, considered the hummingbird at the feeder, and went back to sleep. Alice's pencil moved very steadily across the page. Harry, after a moment, reached over and laid his hand on her knee. Alice did not look up. She put her left hand lightly on top of his. She did not stop drawing. She did not, in fact, stop drawing for another quarter of an hour. By the time she did, the hummingbird had gone, and Esme had finished with the roses, and Carlyle had turned a page, and the small bright Saturday in May had moved into the small bright afternoon, and Harry, looking up across the lawn at the long line of the alder, and the cedar and the small slope of Carlyle's grass running down into the trees, felt in his chest, for the first time since he had stepped off a greyhound on a wet October Wednesday 18 months earlier, the small, clean, settled weight of a man who had, finally, come home. He was, by every measure that wizard kind would have recognized, a long way from where he had been raised. He was, by every measure that mattered, exactly where he was supposed to be. Alice, beside him, finished the sketch. She closed the pad. She set the pencil on top of it. She turned her head and her eyes found his, and she smiled, the small, bright, complicated smile she smiled at him now, the smile that meant, in the considerable shorthand of the language they had been building between them since the corner of Forks Avenue and Russell Street, all of the small things she did not need to say. He smiled back. Outside on the long lawn, a light wet wind picked up, and a single red leaf, the kind of leaf that ought not in May to have been anywhere on the ground at all, drifted slowly and deliberately, and not at any angle the wind suggested, across the face of the porch, and hung, very briefly, in the air at a height of 3 feet between Harry and Alice, and turned once and dropped gently on the open page of Alice's sketchbook. Alice looked at the leaf. Harry looked at the leaf. Edward on the swing looked at the leaf. Edward, after a moment, said, "Was that you, Harry?" "Number, It was both of us." Edward glanced very briefly at Alice. Alice, with the small, bright innocence of a woman who had been doing things on purpose all morning, did not look up. Edward smiled. He went back to his guitar. Alice picked up the leaf. She tucked it very carefully between the pages of her sketchbook and closed the book and laid it down on the bench beside her and slid her hand very deliberately into Harry's, and she did not let go for the rest of the afternoon. Chapter 10 in